Good afternoon. The December 13th work session is now in order. Paul, roll call, please.
Mr. Susan?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Mr. Trent?
Here.
Ms. Jenkins?
Present.
Ms. Campbell?
Here.
Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first topic on today's agenda is Space Coast Junior Senior High School's additional construction management services. Ms. Sue Han, Assistant of Superintendent of Facilities, will be presenting. Ms. Han.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to walk you through where we are with the Space Coast Junior Senior High School track. As you recall, the board approved the construction management contract for the resurfacing and rubberization of the track in November. However, there was an alternate option that was noted on the agenda that was to widen the track from 6 lanes to 8 lanes. And the board gave us an opportunity to go ahead and explore that a little bit more and provide some research to you as to how we've progressed through the track capital program. And so just very briefly, as I mentioned previously, we have been working on renewal and rubberization of all of our high school tracks with the exceptions of West Shore and Edgewood, who don't actually have functioning tracks. So what I'm about to say applies to the other 14 tracks. We have gone through the program on the theory of renewal of the track assets that we have, and then while we are doing that as part of the sales surtax program, also going in and rubberizing the tracks. And so that was a big ask from our athletic directors a couple years ago, and we were able to combine those two things while we're on site. So we've gone through several projects already, and I just want to let you know we have 8 that are finished, 3 that are under contract, 2 that are under design, and 1, Satellite High School, that was done back in 2017, and that was done largely with community funding. Some district funds were involved in that project, and that's really the case for most of these. So as we have progressed through the track program, the parameters around which we have done them is we, the district, will be renewing the track and rubberizing the track. We'll do the interior curbing and exterior curbing because those are aspects of the project that will preserve the life of the track. So from the perspective of the building of the track itself, that's what we have included. But we're basically putting back what is there. So in the case of a couple of schools, they went from 7 to 8 lanes via striping. The footprint of the track was wide enough to be able to do that. Melbourne High School is the one exception. They are constrained at 6 lanes. We didn't look at widening the Melbourne High School track because they're also constrained by the turf field that they have and the grandstand bleachers that they have. And so there really was no physical way to do that without a fairly significant project. In the case of Space Coast Junior Senior High School, they have 6 lanes, and our normal protocol would have been to just simply resurface what's there and then rubberize the 6 lanes that they have. The width of the track was not sufficient to give them any more lanes, so they asked for an alternate to widen the track. So we designed it so that it could be done, and our construction manager gave us a price for it, and that's what we presented at the last board meeting at $183,000 to do that work. The unique aspect of the Space Coast track is that the grandstand bleachers, coincidentally, were failing at approximately the same time, and so the grandstand bleachers are no longer in the way because we had to tear them down. So the opportunity to widen the track at Space Coast Junior Senior High School is present basically now. And so the ability to do the widening is really now if we are going to make that leap. In terms of how we've treated other schools, the way that we have framed this is that, as I said, the district funds the basic track renewal and rubberization, and the schools have been fundraising for some of their additional track assets that they'd like to have, and those included field events. So we did very few field events as part of the project unless the school wanted to fund those. And we had several schools that did do a fairly significant amount of fundraising, and certainly some of them to contribute resources to doing the field events. So in looking at our track inventory, I believe that there are 7 of them that can actually host regional meets, meaning they have the track, they have correct number of lanes, correct distance and all of that, and they have the field events. So that is not the case with all of our tracks. So some of them have been improved and are not slated for hosting regional meets, like O'Galley is probably an example of one of those. So we're kind of all over the board with our track situation. So what you have before you today is a summary of what I've just said, and there is a $183,000 cost to widen the track if we do that concurrently with the rubberization and renewal contract. So the board also asked me to take a look at how we could fund the $183,000. And so I took a look at our capital plan, and we have a project in our capital plan that relates to Mila Elementary School. And we've been talking with the principal, and this goes back a year or so, probably a little bit more than a year, about serving the ESE students better at Mila. And the current building in which those students are served really could use a significant upgrade and potentially a replacement. But we really have to take a look at what is the best way to deal with that situation. Is it constructing a new building? Is it trying to do rehabilitation and renovation of the existing building? Our initial thinking was around probably a new building. But we really need to do an RFQ process to bring in an architect to take a look at that situation, and we just hadn't quite gotten around to doing that part yet. So in looking at the capital program, I was pretty comfortable that we could proceed with the RFQ, we could proceed with the initial phase where we bring in an architect to do that analysis of what is the best way to serve those students, and then we backfill the remainder of the funding in the fiscal year 24 capital plan. So we actually have $250,000 that was slated, $100,000 from last year, $150,000 from this year's capital plan for that project. We could use a portion of those resources for the track, and then when we do the FY24 capital plan, we would simply request that money be replenished. And at that time, we'd probably have a better idea of exactly what project we would be doing, what the scope would be. So we'd have a better sense of what the design fees would be and what the ultimate project would be, and whether that's an impact fee type of project or whether it's a capital project to serve those students better. So that was the option I looked at for potentially funding that widening of the track. And so with that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions. If the board had, whatever the consensus of the board is, if we choose to move forward, then I would bring that as a formal change order request at the January board meeting, but the contractor is prepared to move ahead if that's the will of the board.
Thank you, Sue. So what Sue's asking is do we, first off, if there's any discussion, but then also if we can approve and give direction. So is there any discussion? Does anybody want to talk about it?
Can I ask Sue a question? Is that
Absolutely.
okay? Just to be clear on the Mila project, the time frame for that has not been established yet. It sounds like you're in the very beginning phases of that. So do you know what that project is going to potentially cost us?
So yes, we're at the very beginning stages. No on what it potentially would cost. A classroom addition for an elementary school, $5 to $7 million, depending on what we would actually do for an addition. Renovation's probably about the same.
Okay. So right now, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like $250,000 is what's been kind of carved out for that project. So we're still a ways off from what we're going to need there.
Right, and the intention was just to get started because we really need to do a lot of work on the scoping of the project. We have a similar project at West Melbourne Elementary where we're not quite sure what the answer is, but we know we need some additional student stations there. So
Okay.
we're going to pursue it very similarly to what we're doing at West Melbourne.
Got you. Okay.
Ms. Campbell?
So this is a unique situation. I have a few just hesitations and then a suggestion. Hesitation is, we as much as we would like for every high school to have the same facilities, the fact is that they just don't. They weren't all built at the same time. They weren't all built in the same. Each high school has a different footprint on their property. It's not lost on me because I've had community reach out to me multiple times about Mel High has 0 field events facilities, and then we look at our two, Heritage and not Heritage, West Shore and Edgewood. Although they don't have tracks, they do have track teams, correct? So those are having to use other schools' facilities. Unfortunately, those 2 schools are close by other schools that they can use, but it does create a potential problem. My other hesitation is that, in the description on the second page, it says the cost to widen the track is $183,000. The school has indicated they're not capable of this level of fundraising. I totally believe that because, Space Coast Junior Senior High is situated geographically in a place where they're not in a city. Even some of our, Cocoa has been a high-need school that we've prioritized funding for because of the percentage of free and reduced lunch and all of that. But Cocoa is very supported in their community because they're right in the middle of Cocoa, and they have, I know Ms. Jenkins has shared with us before, community, county, even state, and not international, but national recognition and help. Space Coast Junior Senior High being in Port St. John, it's just not really. It's not a city. They don't have the same kind of support like a Viera or a Cocoa or a Mel or some things like that. So I understand, but I do feel like because we have this process of fundraising, that there should be some buy-in from the school, even if it's not this level. So for our new board members, we have a process that Ms. Han area oversees called the School Improvement. I don't know what's it called.
School Initiated Project.
School, yeah.
Yeah.
We have 2 SIPs. One of them is this one, School Initiated Project Fund, which is a matching fund. And we have priority schools, which are Title I schools and schools that have different, like I said, higher ratios of free reduced lunch. They can get a bigger match. So if a school wants to, up to $37,500, up to $25,000 for other schools. So if a school wants to do a big playground thing, we've had this for years, they can raise whatever. They want a new marquee, it's going to cost $14,000. They raise $7,000. The district matches it at $7,000. If they're priority school, they raise $7,000. The district matches it at like a 75% match. I feel like Space Coast is one of the ones that can get the 75% match. I'm not saying they need to raise up to $183,000, but I just feel like the school needs to have some buy-in here. It would be, and I'm not willing to set an amount right this minute, but I just feel like it would be perceived by the rest of the schools in the district to be more fair. And because they have done the hard work of doing some fundraising, like I said, I don't believe they're able to do this level of fundraising, but I think it would be helpful to have some kind of buy-in at this level. And I don't know, Ms. Hannah, if you've talked to the school leadership there to see if they would be willing or able to do that.
I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell, I had not talked to
Okay.
the school leadership about that, but we've been talking with them about some other athletic facilities, and so I feel like a nominal type of contribution is probably within their reach.
Okay.
I think,
I'm sorry, Mr. Susan, go ahead.
no, go ahead, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
And we would certainly work with them to be able to move forward with the contract while they were doing their fundraising.
Right.
So-
Yeah. Right. Because you said the time is now, and I don't want to necessarily put a hold on it, but just some kind of skin in the game, I guess.
So I agree with you, Ms. Campbell. Many of our facilities are in equity, right? So Mel High received over $1 million for their football field. And Palm Bay's the same way, and school districts don't. Many schools have auditoriums, many schools have mini, you know what I mean? So there's inequities out there, unfortunately. Viera High School doesn't have a baseball and a softball field. They have to go other places. So I wanted to just tell a story from my perspective. So I taught at Space Coast Junior Senior High School for 6 years. And I loved that school. I coached football, I coached wrestling. One of the issues that Space Coast Junior Senior High School has is it was built as a middle school. And so your track and many of the other facilities were built to become middle school facilities. So when you didn't have a large auditorium, they don't have a lot of the things that a high school needs. And one of the things that you pointed out, which I agree with you 100%, is Port's they're not a city. So like they literally have the bagel shop and a couple other places that fund like every single rec league and everything else. And it's a unique situation in that it's a bedroom community cornered off by basically forests, and you don't have it connected to others. But at the same time, where I was coming across is there's inequities across. Like Mel High has the field, Palm Bay has the field. There's certain ones there, but I would say that I would be comfortable moving forward with not making them go in, because the other piece is that we would be taking away from one of those Title I schools, because there's only a certain amount of money that's inside that fund that they fund those with. So if another school was to present a funding source and they did not get it, so like if your Title I schools all apply and Space Coast comes in, they'll get bumped because they're not on the priority list. So then we have a problem where we're like, well, what are we going to do? So I feel, and this is, I understand 100% where you're coming from, Ms. Campbell, but the fact that it was built as a middle school to service for a while, then a high school, the track was never built out. Every single facility they have is like not big enough for the next. And the fact that it would take away from possible Title I schools for the fundraising, I would say that, you know what I mean, that would be my thought process, that we would just move forward with allowing them to do it. But I'm open to the board. I just wanted to say that since everybody had their part of the conversation. Any other comments?
Please. I would hope that this board uses this moment to recognize and reflect the fact that inequity is rampant throughout the district. And I think it would be advantageous of us to actually educate ourselves on where that inequity lies. And if we're going to talk about athletics, like let's stick there. I'm not against these students getting what they deserve and need in their community that can't fundraise. I acknowledge that. I've always said, you know, there was a line that I read that stuck with me forever where equal means everyone gets the same, equity means everyone gets what they need. And so I believe in our school district, there's no way we could fund all these projects for every single school, right? Of course. And I think it's okay and right as a society and a community for us to help those schools and communities that probably can't fund it themselves. But I just want to highlight and make it very clear to everyone that this is an issue we've had for a while. And I want to make sure that we're going to, if we start this precedent, that we carry forward to all of our schools. And that's a precedent that we're going to be setting. And I'm okay with that, but we need to recognize that that's the precedent we're setting. And I hope we follow through with it, because I know it's easy to mention our schools like Title I's and stuff that we say get more funding and all that. But, you know, when I was participating in that COCO project, the only thing I was aware of, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they were getting at the time was the track like everybody else. And there's a lot of need. There's a lot of need in some of our schools who can't do it themselves. And so, again, I'm not against this by any means, but if this is going to be a precedent, then we better follow through. We better be doing this for all of our students who have those deficits and those needs. That is my only hesitation. I don't know if we're going to do that. And that's expensive. Let's be realistic about it too. And I understand the timeline here. I understand that, you know, this is the right time to do this project. So I acknowledge that wholeheartedly. But I think if we're going to have that conversation, again, we need to educate ourselves and take a real hard look about where those inequities lie.
I might remind the board, and we may be able to do that, but I think, Ms. Sue, didn't you spend some aggressive time to identify all the inequities inside the district, athletic facilities, and other places?
I wouldn't say all of them, but we have been trying to look at that as, in fact, the field events is one area where we have surveyed our schools, so you saw the results of that. Not all schools have all field events. Space Coast is one where there's another piece of the potential ad alternates that's $143,000 or so worth of improvements to the field amenities that are not part of this contract. And that would typically be something that the school would fund, and schools have funded those improvements. So yes, we are trying to get there, and we looked at all of our playgrounds. We know who has 2 and who has 8. We're trying to get a handle on that. And so as we're looking at conditions of assets we do have, we're also comparing what assets are missing from schools. So it's kind of an ongoing work, and it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science. But we're trying to get a much better handle on at least the data so that we can make good decisions about these types of things.
Can I just clarify that real quick? Because I didn't want that to come across like the district and the staff isn't doing that. I genuinely mean that us as board members have a responsibility to be educated about it and to make sure we understand it, because we're the ones who are going to set that precedent. So we need to understand it. So I didn't mean that, you're not looking into it. Sue,
No, I understand, Ms. Jenkins.
I know you're on it.
There's a lot of data that we don't have. And so in addition to what you said, we are trying to gather more data about those issues so that we can present you with, okay, here's who has what tracks, and who has what field facilities, and who has field houses, and who has turf fields, and be able to make good capital decisions, capital programming decisions about our athletic facilities and our ancillary facilities at our schools.
And I think, I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell, you go
I
ahead.
was just going to make a suggestion. Ms. Han, you just very recently sent us the report from the school-initiated projects for the fall round. We do a fall round and a spring round, and I believe there was about $100,000 left over, because every semester we don't always have all the requests, and all that money gets rolled over and added to the funding for the spring. We traditionally have money left over just about every time, if I recall. So what I would suggest is, I'm just going to toss out an amount, and I'm going to keep it low, keep the bar low, that we asked the school to raise $5,000. They would qualify for $7,500 match because they are a priority school. That's $12,500. That doesn't have to come out of MILA and capital, but I think it's manageable, for a school to put that kind of fundraising effort, and it just shows good faith. Hey, we're gonna at least put our part. I don't know if the rest of the board would be in agreement of that. We just asked them, would you contribute that much? And then some of that funding could come, rather out of a capital, come out of that school-initiated project funding mechanism.
Ms. Han, are you allowed to apply for that one time per season?
It's one time per cycle, so the next cycle opens in February, and they would be able to apply. And if they're successful, that would allow the 12.5 to be used, and if they're unsuccessful, their $5,000 could still be a contribution to the cost of the track.
And another question real quick, and then I'm sorry if I have other people that would like to. The question is if they're going, does it behoove us as a school district to, if they're fundraising for the other amenities that we spoke of, to have them that built at the same time as the track as they're there if they're fundraising for it, or is that something that some of the other schools are getting added on later?
Most of them are getting them added on at the end of the track project. So
Right.
they're still under construction, but we work with our vendors on that and try to match the timing with the fundraising so that we can support what the school is doing.
And if they apply to pay for what Ms. Campbell's saying in February, they would not be able to reapply to fundraise for the internal components to their track until August of the next year, which would then become available in like November of next year, so a year from now?
So, yes, so the cycle will open in February for the balance, which is around $100,000, and then if the board appropriates another $300,000 through the capital cycle, that cycle opens in October. And again, if we know the schools are doing this, we will work with them on the funding to make sure that we finish their project and not let the cycle affect the project execution.
Can I ask a
Thank you.
question just to be clear? Because I like what you're saying, Ms. Campbell, about them having skin in the game and investing in it. I understand that. It's just the amount of the project is so much that they can't come up with that. So I don't necessarily oppose that. I just, to be clear though, the 12.5 doesn't get us there. We're still a long ways off, right? I mean,
Right, no, but it's a matter of where it's coming from. Oh, sorry. wherever it's coming from. So 5,000 is coming from the school, 7,500 is coming from this school-initiated project grant.
Okay.
Then that's $12,500 that's not going to come from our capital
Got you,
budget.
okay.
Which leaves more in the capital to put towards MILA and things like that. So it's not a matter of we're not going to do it, it's a matter of letting them.
I see, okay.
And even if they don't, as Ms. Hand said, even if they don't, you do it through the matching. If they just say, you know what, we're going to raise our 5,000 and put it towards it, that's, you know, it's still a contribution, but it's not slowing down the process. It's just a matter of where the funding's going to come from.
Okay, I understand, and I agree. I mean, there are schools that need additional attention and help, and I don't think that that's wrong to say that these schools that are underprivileged, that need additional help, that we should step in and help in those aspects. So, yeah.
I just so everybody knows, I kind of feel, you know, I used to do the car washes, and
Yeah.
we would work all day for $240.
Right.
And then we would go hit up all of the local bagel stores and the Pizza Huts, and we would get $500. And then, you know what I mean? And unfortunately for them, they get hit all the time. And it's unique in the fact that Titusville, like you said, has the Titusville, and Astronaut has Titusville. Cocoa has Cocoa. And you start running all the way down, there's many of our high schools have a city that they're a part of, and Port St. John's a unique thing. So with that and the knowledge that I had, I would like to move on just letting them receive it, but if there's board direction to go, Mr. Trent, you've been kind of quiet on this. You got something?
So if you were going to build Ms. Hahn, if you were going to build a new track for a high school, would you build it at 6 lanes or would you build it at 8 lanes?
8 lanes.
8 lanes. It just seems like the timing is perfect, that you're there doing work. That's almost a bare minimum at the space, and it would allow us to get the 8 lanes in. I would suggest, you know, it looks like we have the money from somewhere, and you know, the time is of the essence. They're there to do it now. Raising $5,000, that's great for the schools. I mean, I think having skin in the game, but it looks like they're going to be doing some fundraising down the road for the other part of the project. So, and again, not having that downtown, not having businesses abundant in the area, I would move towards let's just get it done and move on. And equity is a part of and a fact of life here in the county, and I know we're going to have this conversation again and again. But in this instance, you know, I just would like to get this done for that school.
I can, oh, sorry.
I have a follow-up question, or 2 questions. So the school-initiated projects, just to clarify and confirm, if they were to apply for that, they're allowed to do partial project?
Yes,
Correct? Okay, just want to make sure. And then, Mr. Susan, Mr. Trent, I know that you foresee them fundraising for the next part of that project, which would be those field, I don't know,
They're like
you know
shot
me.
put, discus,
Thank you.
long jump.
You know me when it comes to sports. But the reality is they're not going to be able to fundraise and fully fund that either, right? So how much does that typically cost?
So in aggregate, the number was about 143,000.
Okay.
And the events were about 25 to 60 each.
Okay.
So, and they'll have to look at the condition and what is more important to upgrade, that type of thing. So I'll work with Mr. Flora, and when I bring this back to you in January, I'll have a little better feel for what capacity they have and how we might handle their share. So
And the reason I'm asking that question is not to say that we're funding all those projects by any means, but the reason I'm saying that is because the likelihood of them then going to fundraise for that when they can't fundraise for this is honestly slim, right? So by applying for the school-initiated project, it doesn't inhibit them for those projects, because
Not at all.
Again, the reality is that's a really costly project
Right.
that they would also need support in. And so I see no harm in the game for them building some pride and some buy-in to it, setting the bar at an achievable level, and then again, you know, using the funds we already have set aside in a different categorical instead of going into capital. So I agree with Ms. Campbell on that one.
So Miss Hand, what I'm seeing from the direction of the board, and if you wanted to speak again, but it's, hey, there's some sort of ask for some of it, but you think you could go back to Mr. Floor and come back to us with a better suggestion of what they can do, rather than us trying to figure that piece out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've given me some parameters, and so I'll work with Mr. Flora, and then when I present the change order, I'll just disclose what what we've worked out with Mr. Flora as part of the board action in January.
Right now, it's 2-2, so if you had something you wanted to say.
I just want to also be clear, this is not going to hurt Mila, correct, with this, with moving this?
there's
I don't want to do
no
anything that's going to
impact on
hinder,
Mila
okay.
at
That's, I want to be clear and make sure that's clarified. I like the skin in the game. I think that that makes it fair, and I think that the schools that have invested currently into their tracks, that they would appreciate the fact that we are trying to raise something. So I think that that school should be able to come up with a little bit of the money, and I'll help initiate some of that. If they need some help knocking on doors and asking for money, I'll get out there and do it with them. So, but yeah, I think that that's a good directive to go.
Perfect. I think you got direction, unless Ms. Campbell wants to say something. Anybody else? We're all good.
No, good.
Dr. Thetty?
Can I just provide one little point of clarification? Space Coast is a Tier 1 school. It's not one of our priority schools, and I think I heard that in the discussion, so I just wanted to provide that point of clarification.
Right,
Thank you.
yeah, but I think when
It
it
might
comes
get
to the SIPs, I think they are,
So it's Title I in priority schools, and they may meet the Title I requirement. I'm not positive off the top of my head.
they're
They
not a
don't.
Title I school,
They don't.
but I can't remember. I don't
No,
know.
they're not.
I think-
They're not a Tier 1. Okay, so that would be a 50, so it'd be a
50-50
one-to-one
match.
match.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
why I wanted to point that,
Thank
provide
you.
that clarification. Thank you.
I
Thank you.
think Ms. Hand's going to go meet with them and come back with a proposal, but I think you've got what you need.
Yes, sir.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Hand. Next up is the topic is the middle school financing presented by Ms. Hand.
Sir, thank you. So you might notice that foot-high stack of paper sitting there in that green folder. We've been working on this for a while. And so the board had taken several previous actions on the middle school that will be built next, I'm sorry, I'm no longer in my office. Where are we?
That way.
Next to Vieira High School to the north. And so we have, we've done a number of things to bring us to this point. More recently, we have engaged an architect to use a prototype design, and that has been ongoing for several months, and they're just about finished with their design documents, so ready to go. We concurrently engaged a construction manager, and so the construction manager has been working alongside the architect as the design has been developed to try to make sure that we are managing our costs. We are working with our stakeholders to make sure that we're delivering the middle school that meets our needs here in the district. And so that process has been ongoing. And we realized a while back that our impact fee revenues are not sufficient in terms of cash on hand to be able to fund the project with cash. And so we met with the board and on 2 occasions in workshop session talking about, we believe we're going to need some gap financing in order to start construction when we're ready to start construction. And we are ready to start construction basically now. We have an early works guaranteed maximum price proposal that will be before you this evening that is about $8 million, and that is to cover things like buying mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, early lead time items, and also that will allow the site work to get started in January. And so what we have previously told the board, and it remains true, is that if we start the project now, we'll be able to open in August of '24. If we delay, we will not be able to open in August of '24. So that was really the impetus for talking with the board about needing some very short-term gap financing. So the board gave us direction to proceed down those lines, and we issued an invitation to negotiate for certificates of participation, basically short-term financing, and framed it in about a $30 million need between the cash that I estimate having on hand and the total cost of the project. So in order to issue a purchase order for $50-something million project, we have to have the cash in hand to be able to do that. So we can't issue a purchase order for $55 million if we don't have $55 million available. So that was really the key point. So we issued the invitation to negotiate, indicated we wanted short-term financing, and we wanted to be able to pay it back as soon as possible. That was one of the strong directions we received previously from the board, is we want to be able to have that early payback if at all possible. Well, several banks gave us some very good proposals. But one allowed us to use a line of credit, which is a little bit unique in the certificates of participation realm. But the line of credit allows us to borrow substantially less, because as we are proceeding through the construction of the project, basically spending money, we're also receiving quarterly impact fee payments. And so because we have that in and out, we actually will be able to borrow much less than the total gap. So having the line of credit out there allows us to issue that purchase order, but we don't actually need to draw down the same amount of resources that we would have under traditional financing structure. So with that, we have put together a structure that Mr. Ford, I think, could probably elaborate on a little bit better, but the terms for engineers is that we basically have a line of credit, and we will draw down that line of credit when we need to. My estimates at this point is that we probably won't even need to make a draw for about another year, as we do have about half of the cost of the project cash on hand, ready to go. And so the cost of borrowing is significantly less than what we had previously presented to the board. So we are ready to move forward. What we have on your agenda this evening is basically the analysis that I've just articulated. That will be considered by the board. There are implementing documents that go along with that are attached to the resolution. And then the board will recess, will convene the leasing corp. The leasing corp will act on a similar resolution. And then following that, the board will reconvene and then potentially act on the early works proposal. So that is where we are with the middle school financing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sue. Is there anybody up here that has any questions?
I have a side question, because you just sparked my memory of something. We've been over this like 100 times, so thank you for re-articulating that for the public as well. But you just reminded me of something. The cost per student station, and this is more of a Russell Brune question, but was that part of our legislative initiatives that we were going to discuss this year about changing? Okay, I don't remember.
Yes, and just so you know, FSBA also made it part of their platform this year too.
Okay, awesome. And for people listening, what that really means is the state sets an amount that we can technically fund to build new schools, and it is nowhere near the appropriate amount. And so then it leaves this gap in order for us to finance and figure out ourselves. So, and there's many, many other laws constraining that, but we won't get into that. So anyway, thank you. Just want to reiterate too, not only do we want to open the school as soon as possible, because the need has been here for years and years and years, and the community has been crying out, but just to remind everybody, it also saves us money in the long run, because the cost of goods has dramatically increased and will only continue, and is projected to only continue to do so. So the faster we can do this, the better. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins.
I just want to jump in there and say thank you, because when I was one of the people who was adamant about let's borrow as little as possible, pay it off as fast as possible. I couldn't have imagined this. So thank you, Mr. Ford. Thank you, team, for helping us come to this solution, because I think this in the long run is going to be the very best for Brevard, as far as financially and getting this done in a timely way. So I just wanted to express my appreciation.
Ms. Wright?
I just have a few questions. So when you calculated the impact fees and realized that they were not going to be sufficient enough to cover the cost of this build, what time frame specifically did you calculate those fees? How recently has it been looked at?
Oh, about a week ago.
Okay, all right, so it's very recent. Okay, good.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, is it possible for you to let us know what the total limit is of the line of credit?
The total limit we're proposing as of today is $30.1 million.
Okay.
We have one opportunity, Mr. Ford, to downsize that, and we intend to do that when the construction contract is before the board in March. My guess is that we're going to downsize that to around $22 million.
Okay. And then the other question I have is in regards to coming from the private sector, and lines of credit usually are adjustable rates. This is not, correct? It is
It is
adjustable.
adjustable.
Okay, and what is that rate look like for us right now? And I'm sure it's tied to prime.
Did you calculate that?
Yes, ma'am. The interest rate right now is between 3.6 and 3.7%. It's based off of what's called the Bisbee Index,
Okay.
which is a rate published by Bloomberg.
Okay. And what is our margins for the rate to rise? I guess is it?
There's no limitations as to how far the rate can rise, although I believe that there's a statutory maximum of 12% in Florida.
Okay,
I would have to double check that figure, but I think that applies. The floor on this rate is 0.
okay,
So in no event could the interest rate go negative.
okay.
I
All right,
don't think
thank
we're
you.
going to see that eventuality.
Yeah, that would be great if it did.
How can I make that happen?
The other piece of data that you may want, Mrs. Wright, is that we anticipate paying the note off July of '25, so it's pretty short-term financing. And
Okay,
that will depend upon the impact fees that come in, of course. So that rate can also fluctuate, so there's a lot of variables. But based on a pretty conservative estimate, I feel pretty confident that we'll be able to pay this off in a couple of years.
So I just know that building with a line of credit is so much better than building with a straight loan. So for you to be able to secure even someone allowing us to have this opportunity is, I can commend you for doing that. So I know it's going to save the district, lots of money. So I appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
I have one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In regards to where these students are coming from, can you talk a little bit about that and the schools that these students would be pulled from, possibly?
Yes, so that is going to be a process that we kick off in January with a board workshop, because there are a number of different options as to where those students can pull from. And the middle school will affect potentially adjacent schools, and that would include Delora, Kennedy, and McNair. And so that is a conversation we are going to need to have as to how to balance the enrollment. The flip side of that is that we looked at the growth projections in the Vieira area. In fact, we look at it countywide, but there is a tremendous amount of growth projected for Vieira, specifically like due west of where we are. And so I think over time this will stabilize, but that is a very important issue, and we are going to be spending some quality time on that after the first of the year.
Thank you. I think we have everybody's in full support. A couple extra questions, and I think that's good.
I do have one question now that you say that. I know that we're constantly in talks with Vera and the growth and where they're heading. But I do know there was a weird flip and change for when there was supposed to be growth happening west of 95 in Pineda. And then it kind of shifted, their plan shifted a little bit. And so I want to just reconfirm. I mean, they're continuously having these conversations with us, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so obviously they're going to be a part of this conversation and table when we do talk about boundary changes, because in case they decide to flip again and start developing somewhere different. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know, they're booming so fast that they literally have a lottery system for new builds within their developments that are a year and a half out. And so it's pretty easy for them to project where these things are going to happen. So thanks.
Thank you.
I think you have direction. Everybody okay? You good to go, Ms.?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So it's now 2:43, right? We have, normally we finish these up at about 4:30. And I didn't know, we have a pretty packed agenda. I didn't know if you guys wanted to possibly bring some of those other items up, or at least I wanted to get kind of a survey from you guys, if you're okay to go to like 5 o'clock or something like that on the back end. So first I'd like to discuss, are you guys okay to move it to 5 o'clock as a stop so that you guys can get enough food and stuff like that and come back? Or is there a need to finish up at 4:30? Just like to kind of discuss that. Ms. Campbell, since you made the motion the last time.
I guess you're anticipating something from me?
Look, I'm just trying to
You're
take care of
learning,
you.
Mr.
I'm
Cecil.
trying to take care of you.
No, I would just suggest that we potentially could have a long board meeting tonight, so I think getting some,
Yep.
a break, mental break, and some dinner is going to be very important. 5 to 5:30 is kind of tight.
Okay.
But let's plow through. I think we've talked about the public comment policy is something that we can, even if the meeting doesn't go long, I'll be an optimist for a minute tonight, and we have some time, we could even bump that to discussion to this evening. But clearly, the next two items are a high priority for us. So you want to meet in the middle and say, Chick-fil-A only takes 5 minutes, but I think we need a mental break as much as we need a dinner break.
I think what we can do is we can, about 4:20, make that decision. And then the other thing is that if you guys wanted to, we could go, so I think that's good on time. The next one is that we could go to bring back the interim and regular superintendent search and move to the other items, or we can start here. Does anybody want to move some of the other items up and move this? The only reason I was mentioning that was the superintendent search. There's going to be a lot of people watching tonight, and I thought in my mind, I was like, what would people in the evening want to watch? And that would probably be that one over anything here. So that's why I was saying if you wanted to move it up, but I am open to any ideas. Makes no difference. Let's roll.
I would say just go in the order.
Okay.
The agenda's done, and that's
All right, here we go. Thank you very much. The next topic is the interim superintendent search. So everybody understands from the public, I asked Mr. Gibbs to submit ask the board members to submit their rankings for the interim superintendent search. So just for the public to understand, we had 12 rankings. I think 4 of them were former superintendents. 1 of them was a director over 22 schools in Orange County. So we had 12. A couple of them were from the state of Florida. A couple of them were from outside the state. We had interim superintendent rankings, and I'll just read them real quick. Ms. Katie Campbell had James Larson, Mark Rendell, Robert Schiller, James Herholtz, and Cheryl Baker. Jennifer Jenkins had James Larson, Mariah Push-Conister. Megan Wright had Robert Schiller, Mark Rendell, Michael Ahern. I had Mark Rendell, James Larson, Robert Schiller, and Jean Trent had Mark Rendell. So after all of the points, because you give 12 points to first place, 11 points to second place, the total that came out was Mark Rendell 46 points, James Larson 35 points, and Robert Schiller 32 points. So we have 11 points lead, and then so we have 3 people that made the top 3. James Larson and Robert Schiller are a little bit closer. So with those interim superintendent rankings, I think the first thing we wanted to do was see if we wanted to bring back 5, 3, or make a decision today based on what we're doing, and just kind of discuss where your guys' minds are on that. So I'll open up the floor to discuss how many we may want to bring back, and also if the opportunity is that you guys wanted to bring back 5, 3, or make a decision today. So I'm going to leave the floor open. Anybody want to discuss? Ms. Wright.
He was going to go and jump out there. So I would love the opportunity to be able to speak with each one of these individuals before we move forward. So I don't know if I like the idea of the top 3 being, okay, these are our 3 that we kind of all collaboratively agree that they scored the highest. Do we get the opportunity now to speak with them and interview them before making any decisions on the superintendent?
Okay.
The interim superintendent.
Ms. Campbell?
Yeah, I think this was a good process for us to, just see if we can get kind of a numerical consensus. I will reiterate what I said last Monday as far as the process. I think we need to do our due diligence as much as it's added to our schedules over the next week. I think we need to do the interview process and be as transparent, although it would, maybe save us some time to go ahead and pick someone today. I personally don't feel comfortable enough having just seen intent letters and resumes and a few letters of recommendation and doing, quick Google searches to make that decision today. I think this is really important. It gives our community some time to, to give their input as well. Some of them are already reaching out to us, but some of them don't even know who's on the list yet, so this will give us some time. So I think I would be in agreement that we just take these 3 and ask, staff to set up interview times. It sounds like you would like to have a private conversation in addition to group interview. Is that what you're suggesting, Ms. Wright? We've done that before with.
I would, if it's
Yeah.
an option, I would prefer that. If we're, I know we're up against the wire on time, so if time is of the essence and we can only do group, then we'll do group, that's
Right.
fine.
But if we only have 3, it makes it much more
Yeah, and
feasible.
so what we did in the past, just so you guys know, if the direction is that we take in the top 3, is that they come in kind of like what Paul did, where there's a round table of 3 people, and we interview each one of them separately, and they just kind of move between us. So, like, they get up and run to the next room and meet with you.
It's like speed dating only.
We can,
Or virtually.
we can do that, or there's an and Paul, you may want to chime in on what that experience was like. And then, but the other thing you can do is we, being the fact that there's only 3, we may want to just reach out to them and have a conversation with them one-on-one, on our own, and then come back as a group to discuss. So,
Are we allowed to do that, Paul, to reach out to them individually?
If it's individual, you can. We have Thursday reserved and Friday reserved with school board meetings, so you could always schedule 3 one-hour interview groups, so bring them in one at a time
Okay,
as a group, and then in the take an hour break, so let them go down and get lunch, and everybody kind of relax for an hour, and then set them up for a rotation. And the way it looked with me was, I don't remember how many total attorneys you guys had, but the board members moved from room to room, and so there were always 3 meetings going on at the same time.
Right.
And
We
then-
made us move and not them move,
Yeah.
because that wouldn't be nice. We moved, and they got to stay in the same place. We only had 3 at the time, so it actually worked pretty well. And we didn't do hour-long each. We did like 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was 45-minute, like one-on-ones, and then there was like 15-minute breaks, so you could run to the bathroom or grab a snack or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not very clear on, one of these applicants, I'm not sure that they're in state. So
That's-
that would be phone interviews, so we would need to look at that.
Yeah.
let's slow that piece down real quick, because we have some other, I hear the first 2 people saying that they want to bring back the next 3. Ms. Jenkins, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think we told the public that that's what we're going to do, and so we need to stick with it. So I am definitely in agreement with that. I think we need to bring the top 3 back and have real conversations. This is, we're the 49th largest school district in the United States of America, and I don't think we hire someone to run it based off of simply a resume. So I think it's our due diligence to invite them here or via Zoom, obviously, and at least have further conversations.
All right. And Ms. Jenkins, are you, okay, so that's a majority, right? So now that we have the top 3, are we all okay with the top 3 that were chosen between the points? Is that fair enough to you guys?
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
We're
absolutely.
good to go, Ms. Jenkins? All right, so we have that set up, and then one of the things that we have is, it's Tuesday now, and one of the problems we may have is one of those, just like you said, is from out of state. So do we want to move to do one of them virtually? Or do we, you know what I mean, to allow them to interview virtually so they don't have to move, travel, and all that stuff? And then the other one is, do we want to do this on like Friday and then make the decision Friday? Or do we want to take Thursday and Friday together? So the first thing would be, are you guys wanting them to fly in and be in person, or would you want them to be on virtual?
I'm completely fine with virtual, that's fine for me.
Yeah, in fairness to the one who's
Let
out
them
of
make the
state.
decision.
Yeah. I mean, if he's on vacation,
Yeah.
going to Disney World and he can just drive over for the day, that'd be great. We have no idea. There may be some life event that would prevent them from interviewing on Thursday. I think staff can take care of it if we have those days reserved. But I would really like to do back to back to back as a group. I think for fairness, so we've got it all fresh in our mind. We do those back to back to back together, and then in the same day if we can, if everybody's, the 3 candidates,
Do the group.
to do the round robin individual times with them in the same day. I think we can get that done in
All
a,
right.
The reason I was asking was a couple of things is, if we decided to do it all on Friday, then that gives them an extra day to travel, tell their families, tell everybody that they're going to be moving, right? But the other issue that we have is that in the event that we decided to have the interviews, do the group, and then make a decision that day, it only gives us Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to negotiate a contract that we then rectify on Tuesday. So just so you guys know, there's a little contract timing. And I don't know, of course, these individuals, what their contracts are, but, you know what I mean? It might be a little bit tight, but I think that that's doable. I think if they're coming in as an interim, they understand that. And we could do that possibly on Monday. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
On the negotiating part, yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be done over internet, just paper.
Okay.
I'll have a template ready for them for interim,
Okay.
and then I'll shoot it to them, let them redline it in, and if we need to sit down with the chair and me on a phone call to hammer out the finer details that are still up in the air, we'll do that.
Sure. Okay.
I have
So-
a question really quick,
Absolutely.
if I can go ahead. So we advertised Thursday and Friday and Tuesday to be such a way that if we made a decision we could go ahead and vote
There were interviews or school board
on any of
meetings.
those
There were
days.
school board meetings to interview and or select a interim school board attendant.
Okay, so if we, I understand, if we make it, we need to really kind of need to make a decision by the end of day Friday so that staff can negotiate and we can vote on the meeting at the latest on Tuesday. So suggestion is that we go ahead and try to do, unless there's some reason why one of the candidates can't, that we do all the interviewing on Thursday, and that leaves us Friday. But I hate to make the decision on Thursday, because honestly, I just need a little time to breathe in between and pray and think and whatever. But then we make the decision on Friday, if it's possible. But like I said, if it's not, we have to do it all Friday. We'll do what we can. But
Okay. If we
I
can
have a
have
question.
everybody kind of have a conversation wrapped around it. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Jenkins.
So first, I think we're all in consensus that virtual is totally fine. But just to point out, it's customary if we were to ask them to travel here that we would pay for it. So let's avoid that. I just want to remind everyone that we're in this position of feeling pressured and rushed for time because we put ourselves here. And so, Mr. Gibbs, can you please just explain to me and explain to the public why we would have to make that decision so quickly?
On an interim,
Yeah.
Dr. Mullins is still officially superintendent through December 31st. That's when his contract ends, and he will officially be gone. And we will not have a superintendent come January 1st to run the district. So if something happens, there is nobody to call staff, shut down schools, or make those decisions day to day.
And just for conversation piece, I think Dr. Thetty, how long were you deciding to stay here in the
January
event that we
6th.
need?
My last day in district is January 6th with my final date January 20th.
Gotcha. So those are the pieces. So, Ms. Jenkins, do you have anything else you'd like to
Yeah,
say?
no, I appreciate Mr. Gibbs for just readdressing that because I think it's important for the public to understand because there's going to be confusion. But again, we put ourselves here. So I think we need to do our due diligence and make sure we're taking this seriously and do it right and do it transparently, apparently, as much as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Anybody else want to move in? Right now, we have top three. If they want to stay virtual and call in for their interviews, they can. And then Ms. Jenkins had mentioned pay for their travel. That is customary, and if you look in many of the, proposals from the other associations on the travel, maybe something that we decide to do to pay for them to come. If we should stay on it, does anybody have anything else to say about the top three or virtual? If not, we can move on to the paying. Okay.
I think if we can have them in person, the travel, two of them are local. I mean, they can
Right.
be
They're gonna
here. So
drive, yeah.
I would just say give them the option and see what they say. I would, the one that's not local, obviously, is probably not going to travel. That's very short notice to be able to get on a plane and come down here. So it makes sense for that one to be virtual. But I guess we probably need to offer the same to all three.
Right.
We can't offer one of them virtual and
Right.
the other two say we want you in person. So I think I would, yeah.
Are you okay with paying for their travel if they do to get reimbursed? Because that's what the other ones do.
If we offer,
We're going to be offering the superintendents that come from around the state possibly, or the nation. I don't know. That's another conversation.
right, it's another conversation. Let's, I think in order to save the money, maybe give them all the virtual option first.
But if they want to travel themselves, then they can come on their own dime.
Yeah,
Is everybody else okay with that?
I'm not okay with that. If we're putting them as a candidate for this and we're going to not offer to pay for it, we're inhibiting one of those candidates for having the same opportunity that candidates nearby have. So if we were going to open this search nationwide, then we need to do what we said we were going to do, and we need to offer them money if they want to fly here. I think that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, we're inhibiting them, and that's not a level playing field. They may not have even applied then. It doesn't make any sense.
So you're saying that you would like to, what is your direction? To reimburse?
Extend the offer.
Okay. Mr.
Extend the
Gibbs?
offer.
Mr. Gibbs, do you have a say on it?
That's
I'm sorry, Mr. Trent. Sorry.
I don't know, ask Mr. Trent. Extending the offer is fine. I mean,
Okay.
I read his resume. I'm sure he could afford to do
Probably
it.
got the email ready to go right now.
Yeah. He's a rock star.
And I would be surprised if he doesn't take us up on that and get on a plane and get here.
Yeah, I think looking at his resume, he's somebody that will be coming.
Okay.
He will be here Friday.
Yeah. All right, so we've got top 3 virtual, and we're willing to pay for the opportunity if they do come. I think we have a majority on all of that. Is that good? And the top 3 are the points, just to reiterate: Mark Rendell, James Larson, and Robert Schiller. Do you need anything else, Paul, from the interim piece?
Nope.
Okay. All right, we're good on that one. The next one that we want to move to is, let me just get rid of all of these, the superintendent search. And there's a couple of layers to this one. The first one is selecting possibly a superintendent search firm, and then sort of setting direction for what that looks like from the perspective of how long we may want to make that search and some of the input. So if you guys have a second, the first thing is in each one of your folders, you should have a copy, and you should have received this. I think it was last Friday we received these so that we could review them. Each one of the proposals, I'll be honest with you, I want to thank the firms that actually did this in such a short amount of time. Even though it is something that these organizations do on a regular basis, it does take a second to do. And there was 4 firms that brought it forward. There was the Florida School Board Association, Ray and Associates, McPherson and Jacobs, and Hazard, Young, Atia and Associates. I want to say all 4, when I looked at them, are very qualified firms. I think that they all kind of niche into a different area. So depending on how you guys perceive it, maybe the conversation is not more about what's here, but more about what you guys see as a search, and then maybe dwindling it down to what we decide based on that. So I'm going to leave the floor open. One of the things I would like to do is hear, when we do a search, what are you looking for? National, state, you know what I mean? And then we'll go from there. Does that sound good? All right. I'll leave the floor open. Anybody? Miss Wright is on the mic, so go ahead.
Hitting the button. Just to be clear, so with the interim superintendent, is there a time limit on how long they can serve as the interim?
My contract proposal would say until the new superintendent is in place.
Okay, so does this decision about hiring a firm need to be made right now, or is this something that we can look back in 60 days once we're moving past this a little bit and stabilizing things? Or do we need to start a firm search right now? So
It's really up to the school board's timeline, so it has to be done before we break for holiday. It can be something
Right.
that you guys considered after the holidays if you wanted.
Okay, and my thought process on that is if one of these interim superintendents is here and they are amazing and we love them, do we need a firm? And now we've hired a firm and we're spending money that we maybe don't necessarily need to spend if that ends up being that way. So.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made there. I think that if we were to select an interim and they did a good job, that you could make that selection. I think the other issue that you would see is that there's going to be a lot more applications that would come in and give us some more options from the perspective of a national search. I do want to remind everybody that Collier, Charlotte, Manatee, Sarasota, and Broward have all decided, and there's some more that are coming. Osceola just retired, right? So there's an opportunity to wait to make sure that we do things, and then there's the other opportunity that the pool will then become smaller as we get further down the line. So just with those 2 things, I'm open to suggestions, but those were the 2 concerns with both sides. I completely understand where you're coming from, Ms. Wright, and I can see both sides. So anybody else?
Yes, I too have no interest in jumping in quickly on a search. Especially where we're coming up on the holiday, it gives us ample time ourselves to look at the companies that have put forth or these firms that have put forth the proposals. So, and it's money. That's something that we have to take very serious, to not jump in some kind of agreement. We have time. I believe we have. This is where we have time. Interim, no, we don't have time. We need to get somebody in here. This, I think we have time.
Okay. Either of you would like to speak?
Yeah.
Ms.
please.
Jenkins?
So if we don't make this decision, we're sending a message to the public that can be construed any which way they want to. Again, we had this conversation previously, and I believe we have an obligation to the community and the public to continue to do what we said we were going to do. One of the things to consider if you don't do it, yes, there's the potential that you can like your interim superintendent, absolutely, but these timelines, the shortest one I think is like almost 4 months, up to 6 months. And so if you delay it, then you're going to delay having a full-term superintendent. And then at what point do you decide you don't like your interim superintendent enough to open up the gate and then have that kind of a public conversation? It's kind of a weird thing to do. Mr. Trent, you bring up a good point. You know, it's money and it's something we need to think about. And Mr. Susan listed all of the school districts that have vacancies. We're going to have to pay the superintendent a lot more money than we paid the last one. And the longer we wait, the more we're going to have to pay that superintendent as the pool gets smaller and smaller. That's just a reality. And so if we're concerned about dollars, then the smartest thing to do would be to jump on this. It's going to be the most cost effective. We're going to secure one of these companies who may not be available anymore when we make that decision 2 months from now. They may raise their cost because their burden might be a little bit higher. And again, those candidates that are in that pool are absolutely going to be requesting a much larger salary than they probably would have requested a couple of months prior. Lastly, I just think it's important for my fellow school board members to be honest about where we're heading. Because I also agree, if we have an idea of what's happening, then no, let's not waste $50,000. So I want you to take a minute and think about that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Campbell?
Mr. Gibbs, I don't know if Christy Rodriguez is in the room, but do we have any indication that these quotes will be, this is their typical, or do you have a lock-in for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I haven't got anything saying it's only good for 10 days or 30 days.
Okay, good to hear. So it sounds like there's not anybody who's ready. I don't know if you were, Ms. Jenkins, ready to put your preference in for these 4. You didn't speak to that.
I am. I'm sorry. I just wasn't speaking to that.
Okay. Well, did you want to do that?
Yeah.
First? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
We weren't going there, so I didn't jump there yet.
Okay.
I was trying to, just so you guys know, I was trying to get everybody to say if they wanted to move quickly or slowly.
Yeah, okay.
We should go back into which one we want to decide. Ms. Campbell, if you can speak to just whether you wanted to make something before Christmas or wait until after.
So I'm prepared to share. I mean, I kind of made my own little, kind of like we did with the superintendents, ranking 1, 2, 3, 4 with the firms, just on initial glance of looking through all the proposals. Was glad to have 4 to look at. But I think, you know, when I looked at it, there were, I believe all of them gave us kind of a fast track and then a regular. I'm not interested in the fast track because I feel like we're already, we're under the gun right now. But on the other hand, I think we need to go ahead and get started for all the reasons that, in particular, you know, Ms. Schuss and Ms. Jenkins have both mentioned. We need to go ahead and get started. What I feel most strongly about is that we do this process. Even if we get an assistant or an interim superintendent and we fall in love with him, the thing that is in this process, even though it's $40,000 to $50,000 depending on which firm we're going to go with, this process This process includes community input, public meetings, where we're going to have stakeholder groups, and each of them propose their own flavor of doing it, but all of them propose those kinds of meetings so that stakeholders, whether that's student groups, teacher groups, support staff, administrators, parents, and all people from the community can do that. And it's not just the 5 of us making this decision. We will be making the decision. It is the most important decision that we as board members have to make. But to make the best decision, I believe we really need the whole process. And we've got 2 brand new board members. We've got, all kinds of seismic changes going on, and I think we need to walk the process and really hear from the community. And not choosing a firm is going to not be good in our community. I think we need to walk through this process. And the other thing was that because we did this a very quick process, and it just had to be quick, pick the interim. We may have missed some people. I think, full time, we're going to be able to have the time to do the nationwide search, to really all these people go out and do the jobs for us of recruiting. We need to do this. And I don't, if we decide to go ahead and do it, if we want to wait until January, or if we want to give everybody a few more days, we've got 3 advertised board meetings. Paul, is there anything that says we can't add a vote on this to Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday?
Yeah, we could add it to next Tuesday, and I think there'd be sufficient notice if you wanted to wait till you approve the interim's contract and then make a decision on
Yeah, that would slow it down a little bit if you guys need some more time. I've already picked who would be my top couple. But I don't want to slow it down too much.
I just want to jump in there. You may not, I don't know how much would happen in the interim because there's going to be contracting that takes place. The district completely shuts down December 22nd. So there's going to be no procurement people to get the contract in place until January. They can say, hey, you're the selection, and you guys can start working on your contract proposals, and here's our templates and stuff. But it will not be before the board for approval until January.
I think if we did approve today, that we would be able to get a contract before we leave and set direction.
Well,
we may not want to start until
the proposal
January.
was to move that decision to next week. So if you guys don't want to discuss it now and select someone now, then the contracts, we would notify them, hey, the board selected you, but they wouldn't be starting until the January meeting when the contract's actually approved.
And I'll be honest with you. I do believe so. If you're done, I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I agree with you, Ms. Jenkins, that I think that we do need to move this thing along, because what we're going to end up in is a situation just like you said. So I'm okay with moving forward with, selecting one. I would like to select one and then see if they can come by and just kind of present to us before we leave for break, just so that we can think about over break what we would like to do. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that would happen, but I truly believe in the process. I believe that we should go to a search firm that is going to send it out nationally. I think we will attract some really good names. And I think that what it behooves us to do is to start thinking about, just like you said, Ms. Campbell, we need to have community input. We need to have all of those things, because you're right, like the superintendent is a community decision. And I think that we represent the community, so I agree with you 100%. And what we can start doing is thinking about, hey, what we may need to do so that when we come back, we can make those decisions. It might even be like a virtual thing or something, but I would like to throw that caveat in. I think we've got board direction to try to make a decision right now. But I think that also I would like to say, hey, if we can have some sort of a prep meeting saying, hey, before you guys go away to break, these are some of the things that you should think about, and then we come back and meet with them and set direction.
We don't have that type of meeting set up.
But they've kind of
We're already meeting, right?
We have school board meetings noticed. We do not have like a workshop with the potential vendors noticed, so.
But they've kind of given us, even just reading through
Yeah.
this, get your
You're right.
mind
You're right.
going as to what they're going to be asking us.
Yep.
Yeah, we could certainly notice them and then ask for dates in the new year and notice a workshop that way, because some of them have different prices based on what package you want and what add-ons you want. So you could bring them in at that point and talk about it and then make your final package selections to finalize the contract. And we would have time to notice that in the new year.
And just so everybody knows, staff and I are working on putting together an off-site work session where we can come together and kind of talk about not only some of these things, but some other things that we may want to set direction for the next year. So that might be the appropriate time, sometime in the middle of January or earlier, depending on how that plays out. So I guess we have direction to make a selection now. Unfortunately, you guys may have thought that you may not have to. So do you guys need a minute to kind of look through all this stuff? Would you like that? And we move to
No,
another-
I've looked through all of these, so I appreciate the perspective. Those are things I was not thinking through whenever, you share your thoughts on why we would want to jump on this right now. I understand that. It sounds like it is something that we need to move forward with. So I would say with that, do we want to go with the ranking system like we did with the superintendent search for the interim, or what's the best way to?
I think, yeah, I think one of the things when we're dealing with the search firm is that they are all kind of niched into a different area. So what I was thinking is one, are we willing to try to make a decision today? The second is are we willing to say kind of like what our feel is, like what do we want? And then that might help. Or if you guys feel very interested in this, we can make the decision based on a ranking system too. It's either way. I mean, ranking system might be the quicker way to do it, but I don't know.
I would just suggest that let's just start the conversation with, and then if we might have consensus, we might all be kind of the same thing, and that would make it easy. But if we don't, then maybe we do need to slow ourselves down and say, can you add it to next Tuesday?
Perfect
So we
time.
have a little more time to think about it. But, if we start talking about it, we might.
Well, why don't we give them a minute, and Ms. Campbell, if you want to start off.
Sure. Everybody goes in, we read, and different things jump out to our minds. So I don't necessarily have a 1, 2, 3 of why. I do have a 1, 2, 3 of my preference, but of why each one. But I am leaning towards FSBA. Every single one of these firms is going to be doing a national search. And if you look at the FSBA page, on the second page, it even tells, how many applicants they had for each of the counties they've worked with in the last 5 years, how many states are represented. I mean, there's the only one that says that's the lowest number is Brevard. And just a little history, that was the summer when you guys were hiring Dr. Mullins and didn't get through far enough into the process to get those applications, more than that. So, but everyone else, I mean, people are coming from not only all over the country, but all over the world even, to look into that. So I think cost-wise, it's, comparable. I think they're, being in the state of Florida, even though they're going to be asking candidates to come from outside the state of Florida, they are familiar with, to help, guide us in all the requirements and things we might have considered of things that are happening in the state. So that was my number one. And then I had, like a second, and I had 2 that were kind of tied. And the only one that I just wasn't, I just didn't feel as comfortable with, don't feel I have a strong feeling against them, but it's McPherson. I had put them last. For one thing, I know they would have to adjust because based on Florida law, but they made the point of saying they were going to keep all their candidates confidential, and I'm not sure in the state of Florida they actually could do that. That all that is open records, which makes it hard to hire a superintendent in the state of Florida, just so you know. And of course they would be able to follow it, but FSBA would be my first choice.
Okay.
And the other 2 I kind of have tied for second.
Ms. Jenkins, would you have the opportunity? Or would you
Yeah,
like me to
I mean, so number one, I took a look at the cost of each of them, because to be honest, they're not going to be all totally different. The candidates that they're going to poll are probably going to be really similar. So I looked at the cost of all of them. So that was my number one. My number 2 was looking at the size of districts that they've worked with in the past with Ms. Campbell. Unfortunately, the McPherson one doesn't really have a history of working with districts over like 4,000. And so just for me, that was just kind of I don't really know how you're going to work with the community and really judge how the community feels about it. I also just kind of picked a top two myself. I kind of was leaning towards the Ray and Associates just because of the presentation, honestly, and the presentation of the commitment to community input, like you mentioned, Ms. Campbell. I think that's really important. And their timeline was a little bit shorter, not dramatically shorter. They gave you the fast track and long track too, but it was just a little bit shorter. FSBA, I put as a number 2. It wasn't a no for me by any means. And their costs were really similar as well.
Oh, you know what? Something you said about they didn't actually have any, McPherson didn't have any in the state of Florida at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
wasn't
even,
just size.
I didn't
That
know
was,
that.
when you said that, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They had a list of all the states that worked, but they actually hadn't, at least in the ones that they listed for us, they didn't have any from the state of Florida.
Yeah, and the Ray and Associates ones actually had Broward. So, I mean, if you want to talk about size, I mean, they've been working in Florida and then with really large districts as well. And that wasn't the only one, obviously. So that was important to me. But again, I appreciate bringing up that community input piece because I think that's really, really, really critical. Not that FSCBA won't be doing it, but it seems to be a driving focus for them, at almost equal to the input of the board members themselves. And so I think that's important for us to consider.
I will say that I know for a fact, just dealing with these in the past, that if we said we wanted a shorter or a longer time period, they would be able to put that together. All of them are pretty much the same. They were just kind of trying to throw spaghetti on the wall for us. The other thing I wanted to mention to you guys is that much of, if you look at some of the costs in each one of them, they're kind of trying to say, well, depending on if you do or don't. So there's an opportunity to reduce the cost. I mean, the flat fee of the consulting fee is one thing, but many of those costs we may be able to look down. But I just wanted to kind of speak to that and then come over to this side. Mr. Trent, would you like to go, or Ms. Wright? Ms. Wright, go ahead.
I'll go. FSBA was my top one, and then I'm with you, Jennifer, on this one. Ray and Associates, I like their timeline. Honestly, I think that the timeline seems favorable to me, but I'm assuming FSBA can fall in that same timeline. But FSBA's costs do seem lower, and they do break down kind of the menu where we can tweak things to save money. So that would be my number 1 is FSBA.
Okay. Mr. Trent.
Not to echo, but that's exactly right. I'd gone through these in the FSBA. I did like how clear they were on the fees, and that we didn't have to utilize all of them. And us being a member of FSBA already, I didn't see a discount, but that's fine.
That's because if we're not a member, it's a lot more expensive. This is the member
We didn't
rate.
put that
This is
in
the
there.
discount.
Make us feel a little better. But if we had to make a decision, yeah, that's where I would be leaning.
Okay. Thank you. I think one of the things that when I was looking at these, to be honest with you, is somebody, I think it was Ms. Campbell, had mentioned right off the bat, 3 of the other firms are from out of the state. And they may do a great job, but they don't know our state the way FSBA does.
Mm-hmm.
They also don't know us the way the other companies do. And maybe you call it a local advantage or whatever, but I do feel we've had FSBA to come and do group work with us, master board training with us, and I think that they understand our district fairly well, as opposed to somebody who just sent it in because they got a proposal. And I don't think any of these, I think all of these are fully qualified, but for me it was more of that homegrown, they understand the back door to everything that happens in the state, and they know all the other school board members, they understand and can give us direction sort of on how some of the other stuff's going on. So my number 1 choice was FSBA, and just like you guys, Ray and Associates was number 2, because I think like Ms. Jenkins had mentioned and others, is they put together a great presentation, and I think that they're highly qualified. What it was for me is that I thought FSBA would do a better job just because of our local presence. So sounds to me like we have a consensus on FSBA with a 4-to-1. Does anybody disagree with that so that we can kind of start to the next step? Or?
I just want to throw one thing out there,
Okay.
and I know you don't really have time to consider this. I mean, I guess we're doing it tonight, but the one issue that I have with FSBA is there's no clear direction about the community input, and I don't like that. It wasn't clear at all. It sounds like they're just going to facilitate community meetings, and what does that mean? Do we have to put them together? Are you just going to be there to listen? Whereas Ray and Associates seemed really clear to me that they were going to contact the community in multiple forums, in multiple ways. And I think that's really, really critical. And so I think that's something that we need to think about as we're making this decision, because I think it's critical that our community is involved if we're going to move forward.
I think we all agree. So, Paul, you want to reach out to them and?
Yeah, I'll get
they'll
a,
search for 'em?
I'll let Christy know and see if she can't start working on it.
Thank you. And then let's talk about when we may want to meet with them in the month of January. We have a school board meeting on I think later on the 28th. I think that, yeah, later on in the month. We also have the legislative delegation that we're going to be meeting with. I think that's the 11th or 12th or 13th, right in there. Would it be appropriate for us to ask to try to set something with staff before, say, the 15th of January and check our calendars with us so that we can kind of meet with them and set direction?
Yeah.
I think that would be good in the fact that we can get it within a 4-month window, start the process, and I would say, like Ms. Jenkins was saying, we should look at some of those engagement tools that they have. And I wouldn't doubt it if you guys reached out to FSBA and just said, hey, here's my concerns, that they might be able to hear that prior to coming and then listening to us, you know what I mean? So I think if that sounds good with direction, and everybody's kind of giving me the thumbs up, Paul, sometime before the 15th of January, we kind of work with staff to get us the date, and then we select Florida School Board Association as our vendor.
Can we, because we have this, and you said, you know, maybe an offsite time, hopefully with interim superintendent to kind of get to know you. Can we ask Tammy to do, you know, she does the doodle poll and give us, can you do a doodle poll so we like give it like, and put like every date in January that's a possibility so that we can kind of know, because it looks like we're going to need a couple of days in January, especially since we only have one board meeting.
Yeah, and so that you guys know, there's a poll that come out, you click yes to all of them, and then whoever has all of them, then we know those are the dates. That's a great idea. Thank you. We good there, Tammy? Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Right now, we've been at it now for about an hour and a half. Does anybody need to use the restroom, or can we keep moving?
No,
I want to make sure that I don't drive it like I did last Thursday. We have everybody there. Okay.
Thank you.
So the next, thank you so much. I really want to just say right now that the direction that you guys came up with was not only fair to the public, shows the community involvement, and is not a rushed situation, so I really appreciate it. The next topic is the Brevard Public Schools Book Review Committee. This was brought up by Mr. Trent, so I was going to give you the opportunity to kind of lay the groundwork for what you would like to do, Mr. Trent.
All right. All right, thank you on this. This is the perfect spot for us to talk about it in a workshop. And what I'd like to see us talk about is the process from the beginning to the end, from when somebody's requesting review of materials in our libraries, who it goes to, how it gets to a review committee, if it goes to the media specialist or the media specialist and/or the building principal, where they could discuss it first. And I know there's some where they can just remove a book out of the library before it even gets to a review process. Some of the concerns that had come through is just the effectiveness of the committees that we had in place. So if we can get some clarification on how these committees even came to be, the amount of members. The voting members was a concern. The concern I had was many of the voting members were paid BPS employees that had something to do with those books being in the place in the beginning, and they would have to, in some cases, admit that they had something to do with them there. So to ask them to reconsider to have them removed seemed a little bit of a conflict, and maybe put those employees in a particular spot. And then even after some of them were not necessarily removed, but age appropriateness was settled upon, many of the media specialists, felt like now they were being burdened to be the gatekeeper of the books behind the desk. So really just turning this on its ear about what is the best way to review these books. Concern was leaving these books in our libraries for years, actually, before they were reviewed. and not being able to just remove books and then get them quickly reviewed to put them back in. And that's what I'd like to talk about today and have that discussion. I would really like to see some of these boards more reflective upon on the makeup of our school board, rather than just a school committee.
Mr. Trent, did you, during that conversation, I was hearing you say that you may want to hear about how it is that we came up with the current process? Would you like
Correct.
to hear that?
Correct.
So with who in the back row would like to come up and explain the current process of the book review? Who did that fall under?
They're drawing sticks right now.
Yeah, they are. They're all drawing straws and
Ask
they're
Dr. Thetty.
saying, oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Thetty, did you want to?
I was going to say, it falls under Jane Klein, but Dr. Sullivan has run with the process, but it is outlined in our policy, in policy 2521.
Yeah, that's how the committee came to be, is the board developed the policy. They outlined in the policy who would make up that committee, and then the members came up.
Thank you.
I think they all just answered my questions. Yeah, our goal as staff is, of course, to just implement and support the board policy as written. Am I good? As written. And it was a lengthy process in this rewrite, as many of the board members recall, and probably our most rewritten board policy over the years. And so certainly at the will of the board, we're happy to initiate an alternative policy review process, but as the board is aware, that does take a few board meetings. And so policy is a board policy. We're implementing the policy, and certainly open to any direction. I will take a 2-minute liberty since I have the mic and you called me up. I have a tremendous gratitude for the members of the committee, and I'm really proud of the work they did in the first 2 meetings. Really thoughtful discussions. Clearly, had read it. Each of them had read statutes. They were very courteous and respectful of different decisions and thoughts. And I think the board can be proud of the process and how it unfolded. That doesn't mean that the board certainly can't change that. We're okay with that. I just felt like it was really important to honor those that did the work that we asked of them with an unprecedented process before them, and really found them to be quite thoughtful and quite engaging with a lot of really powerful perspectives. And so I serve at the board. As Mr. Trent had asked for the pause, we put it on pause, and certainly are prepared to either continue with committee meetings, wait till the board revision process at whatever direction there is on any revision of it, and then do that. My goal is simply to facilitate. And as they mentioned, Ms. Klein's division owns the policy, but I have lived the policy, and so certainly happy to take that. So again, it's a tough issue. I think the folks did great. Everybody was thoughtful. Everybody read, and everybody really did an amazing job. And I think each of you, and certainly those before, would be proud of the representatives that were on the board, and our staff that spent a lot of time reading some very long books prior to the meeting. So certainly through direction to, I don't know who really, quite frankly, but I would say Mr. Gibbs and us, we could certainly come back with an alternate draft to reinitiate it. I would need direction on
What?
We're kind of midway right now, and would you request a longer pause or not? But I certainly felt that the committee members were pretty amazing.
Thank you for that, and I agree. My committee member is a very special person, and I appreciate all of her
Great.
work. I think, Mr. Trent, if I can help out a little bit here, one of the 2 issues that I heard you say is that the committee makeup between whether those are going to be people from the district or not. And then the other one was, you kind of mentioned speed of review, like how fast that's actually happening. Is there any other basic major components that you'd like to discuss, or is those the 2 just so that staff knows when they're making the changes, what areas, you know what I mean, to change, because there's a lot more to it.
There is.
Okay.
Committee makeup, and I did want to say that the committee did a bang-up job as far as our workers, our media specialists, taking their time out to do that. So it was no knock on them in any way. It's more of us making up this committee.
Sure.
I truly feel to reduce the amount of voting members. I would go all the way down to our appointed member from our board is the voting body of that, and have media specialists or whomever else we would like to have in the district, some admin, just like we have now, but it's just the voting membership there that I would strongly want it to reflect our board. Otherwise, we would do it ourselves.
If we can work on that one piece, right, and then start moving, Dr. Sullivan, for the purpose of the public who's watching, just so they can understand, like we understand these policies, we're reading them. Can you give me the voting makeup of the committee, just so that they can understand?
Absolutely. The committee as defined has 9 voting board members, and that includes a representative of each of the board members, 2 media specialists representing the age bands, and an administrator and a content specialist also familiar with the grade bands. So for we knew that the requests at hand were all of secondary nature, so the committee members all represent that. So that makes 9. Missy Slack is our district-wide media content specialist. She serves as the non-voting facilitator of the meeting and the discussion.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Sullivan. You had mentioned age bands, and I'm sure that we're going to get some calls on that. Can you explain what age bands mean?
Yeah, so these are secondary books of question in secondary schools.
Okay.
And so we have media specialists from our secondary schools. And I use that word specifically because some cross middle and high school. So secondary content versus elementary school content. We have not had a request on any elementary school content at this point.
Okay. All right, so we kind of understand what the voting makeup is now. We
Right.
understand that it was a policy that was developed. So bring it back to you, Mr. Trent, just kind of lay out what your needs are, and then we can discuss it.
Right. The important part is also it's not an easy process to get a book reviewed. I mean, the parent or the person in the county that's wanting these reviewed, they have to do their homework here to do that. I would strongly urge us to get that book off the shelf so we can review it, just in case we are going against statute, that it's not sitting on our shelves when we could possibly someone could be at fault. So that is what I have had, throughout the time that, through the campaign and through our, talking to the public is their biggest concern was, getting them off, review them, put them back as soon as possible. Possibly not. It's not a literary review in many parents' mind. It is the 3 or 4 pages or 20 pages or whatever it is that is of concern. It's not the story. It's how they go about telling it. I'm just telling you, this is what we've heard for a year now. And it's extremely important to me personally to get that off the table, get it off the shelves and reviewed to put it back in. There's no need to buy books. Also, we had to buy each of these members brand new books to go over and read when we have them on our shelves. If we do, then that's where we get those books from.
Okay. So if you can come back to, we had spoken about the committee makeup being the conversation. Mr. Trent, is there a committee makeup that you would like to propose so that we can talk about it from there? And then I agree with you on some of the process. But let's go to that one next if you can. So
Yeah, you could keep it the same makeup. I just want the voting members.
Okay.
I probably won't be totally satisfied until it's, our 5 voting members that we propose ourselves.
So keeping the same committee makeup, but the voting members would be only board members. Okay, so that's the piece.
Board rep.
So
Board
let's
Board rep.
board representatives.
Yes.
So I'm sorry. So is there any discussion on Mr. Trent's proposal?
Yep.
Ms. Wright?
She-
Okay. Ms. Jenkins?
Yeah. question whether or not my fellow board members participated in any of those committee meetings or watched any of them. I also would like to say hats off and thank you to the people who have volunteered their time to participate in this. It is a time sucker. And thank you to the employees who probably were voluntold their additional role and job. I do not agree with reducing the voting members. It sounds like you just don't like the results of the votes that were taken. If we're gonna only have our board representatives vote, then why are we not doing it then? It doesn't make any sense. If we're gonna restrict it to 5 people, then why aren't we reading the books? It doesn't make any sense at all. This was a extremely long process that we had to participate in because of what was put in front of us. It is intentionally thorough. The amount of time that it takes to review the books is not really something we can control. We can't control how many books get sent to us either. Who knows if tomorrow someone wants to send in 50 more books for us to review. I don't personally see any problem with this policy. If I'm being perfectly honest, I was probably the only one who said, why are we even doing this in the first place? So I think that this was well thought out, very intentional. I think it's really, really critical that we have the voice of educators, administrators, parents, guardians, teachers, and the media specialists themselves to participate. And then if you're going to say they can participate, but we're going to take their opinion away and their ability to vote, then why are they participating at all? Are we asking them to lobby our board representatives? That doesn't make any sense. I know Ms. Wright, when I believe it was Ms. Wright, if not, I'm sorry, but when this was brought up originally, the concern was that the board representatives aren't reflective of the new board. And that totally makes sense, right? So you can appoint whoever you want, because that's what it says here in this policy. And I think that's a fair concern, absolutely. But in order to shift the makeup, because we don't like the results of what was happening so far in the beginning, I think is unfair and defeats the purpose of the process. I am concerned about just removing things to remove things, because it just takes a simple Google search to see how quickly that can get abused. There is a county here in the state of Florida where 3,600 books were removed from the libraries from one single individual. And there's no way you can redraft this policy to outweigh someone else's concern from another. You're going to have the playing field be level. And so I don't know how you would battle that issue if that was something that we were willing to take on.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Campbell?
So unintended consequences, and I think that's what I just heard Ms. Jenkins, the last little part was really talking about unintended consequences. Anytime we do policy changes, we have to think about that. With this book review process, I have a couple of kind of tests in my mind. Okay, if we make this change, would that possibly cause XYZ? And trying to avoid that. So I think we got to, as we're going through this, we need to think about that. I know not very long ago, another county, a school board friend in a different county, someone came and challenged the Bible. And so they started pulling that off the shelves. And, are we creating a process where, things that we may not, if somebody wants to come and challenge, which has been challenged in the past, Dr. Seuss books. Are we going to pull all the Dr. Seuss books? So we'd want to be careful. It seems ridiculous, but listen, in today's, we have to think. The day that we're living in, ridiculous happens. Ridiculous happens all the time. So I think probably it sounds like what we need to do is have a work session, because a work session, when we do the policy, we really get to hammer out and change and redline ourselves. I mean, staff will bring recommendations. We could give them some ideas to start with. But as far as the makeup of the committee, and just to give a little history, we've revised this twice since I've been on the board. And what I would say to that is you don't know what you need until you need it. And the revision that we made last spring was to add the district level review process, because we did only have it at a school, and we put so much time and thought into putting that in there, and we'd never needed it, and we never used it, and then all of a sudden now we need to use it, and we realize, oh, we don't have this piece. So I think it can evolve as we see how it's working. I too am just thankful for the way the first committee, I got to watch the full first committee. I would like to have, if you would send us the link of the second one, because I never found that. Did get a summary from my representative, but I would like to watch that myself. It sounds like the biggest priority is the what are we going to do with the books until they're reviewed. I agree with you. When we had the process, in part at least, when we had the process last spring, I made the request that we remove books that are specifically, the complaint is the violation of the statute of, what's harmful to minors, the pornographic material. State statute is pretty descriptive with what should and shouldn't be in there. And I know there's some argument over, the definition of harmful to minors, but I think with that one adjustment, we can actually, the only thing is, how do we do it to not have a random person come up and say, I want to pull all Dr. Seuss books because I think they're all pornographic. Well, clearly they're not. But how do we, I don't know how we judge that. But I think that would be a piece that I would agree with. I don't know what the verbiage would be. That's where the legal people need to work the magic. I agree. I think everybody agreed when we first had this conversation that we do need to make a tweak to the language that allows for a change in board members' representatives. We're all in agreement with that whoever because it originally said they serve for a year. So it needs to say a year or until such time as a board member selects a new representative. So that's an easy tweak. But kind of sounds like, Mr. Susan, that maybe we need to just take this to work session and that's what I'm thinking.
So Mr. Trent was speaking specific to the committee makeup. Did I hear you say that you would like to move to that or to the others? Because I think the process would be another conversation that we would come to next.
No.
So if you can focus on
the committee makeup.
Are you happy with that? Or
Yeah,
would you like to change that in any way?
No, with the process that we put in place over the last two revisions, 2019, I think, and then this one, the intention was very specific, and one, to make it an odd number, and two, to make more board representatives than staff, so that the board representatives have the priority vote. If you watch the first meeting, it was very interesting. It didn't fall.
It isn't because of one way or the other.
Right. It didn't fall. Everybody thinks this person's going to vote this way. I mean, they were all pretty much agreement. I mean, it was like 8-1, thinking about with the decision that they were going to make. So, and then in the end, I think they all agreed with the solution. So, which was in that particular case to put it behind a counter, unless you're 18 or your parents give you permission, you can't check it out. So, I think they did really good work. But the makeup of the committee, I'm actually fine with. I think the process of what are we going to do until we get to the committee is where my concern lies.
Okay. So Ms. Wright?
Yeah, I can understand your struggle with this conflict of interest, because I do understand the fact that if we have media specialists that are responsible for what is in the library and now we're asking them to possibly say, hey, I messed up, I put something in there that shouldn't be there, that could become problematic. The other thing I struggle with is some of these books that are in question, we wouldn't allow someone to stand up there at the microphone and read them. And so when we're talking about something of that nature, and I'm going, wait a minute, we're going to give this to a child. I don't understand the logic there. So I'm like, if it can't be read in a boardroom, and I understand people don't want books removed because they're afraid that they're not going to have access to these books. Let's ask the manufacturer to redact these really crazy pages, and they may end up with a book that's missing 4 or 5 pages. I don't know, but they still have the book, and in essence, they're just going to miss that part that could be harmful. For me, I would always err on the side of protecting a child's innocence. I don't think that we should expose them to things. The book sensation has caused these books, obviously, to be more popular because it's very, in the news and the media. But I would love to see our district move towards something that protects children as much as possible from things that could just be they don't offer any literary value. So the other thing that's been brought up to me is the AP material. So some of these books are in our AP curriculum, and that becomes problematic for our AP teachers because they've already, you know, gone through the lesson plans and created a lot of work around those. So I would just, if we revamp this policy, I would like to see any book that is on an AP curriculum to take priority over how it's addressed and handled. That needs to be responded to first, I think, because it's, and you know, we're using it. But again, I would just err on the side of protecting a child's innocence. That's what I would always choose.
Ms. Wright, if you can give some direction onto the committee makeup, would you like to move to the 5 selected by the board, or would you like to keep the current system the way it is, voting with 9 members?
I think there is a conflict of interest if they're a paid person who is actually responsible for putting a book in a library. There is a conflict of interest there. I understand wanting to have additional opinions and expertise. I get that. Can we pull them from anywhere else other than somebody that we're paying directly for?
Okay. So I'm hearing you say that you do find a conflict of interest and you'd like to move to the 5 selected members of the board?
I don't think
I'm not exactly saying move to the 5. I'm just saying I think that it becomes an issue when they are a media specialist in our schools and they're responsible for the books that are going in there. And now, again, they're either going to have to recognize that, hey, I'm responsible for putting this in there and this is not, shouldn't be in there. It becomes an issue. So I don't know what the perfect solution is, honestly, as we work through this. I think we are going to have to work through it to some degree, but I do think that that is a conflict of interest.
Can I ask a question? Because I think actually, first of all, the media specialists on the committee have to be media specialists that can't be from the school where the book was. So that's not true? Okay. I'm thinking of the school level.
Yeah, school level's a little different, and I appreciate you opening the door to that, because we do need to address both halves of the policy, so essentially the 4 A's and all the 4 B's, if we're going to be discussing committee makeup. So I just wanted to throw that out there. No, when the policy was drafted and board approved, one of the things that we felt was relatively important, and we use the terminology of year-long, so that it wouldn't be bias based on a specific book, right? So we wanted to try to eliminate it being book specific and rather just, you're serving this term this year and what will come will come. And so we took volunteers, basically. You know, surprisingly, they weren't necessarily lining up on the door, but we got volunteers, so they were not voluntold. So I'm pleased to share that. So basically, I took the first administrator that volunteered, you know, and took the first media specialist, basically, and then we would reconvene new folks. So we felt like a year was important to where it wasn't becoming about what book. So that was where the impetus of that decision came from. In terms of, you know, I'm going to have some bias here because, again, I was blown away by the thoughtfulness of the discourse between the staff members and the board members, and I just thought it was super powerful. But of course, again, the will of the board. So we'll certainly support everything, but I thought it was really important to have people who are trained in book selection as well. But again, you know, we're totally comfortable with whatever's decided. I do want to make a point of clarification that part of the length in this time span was we were waiting on the rewrite of the policy. So if you recall, when the request came in, we didn't have a multi-school request, period. And so working with the petitioner, we waited until that was changed so that the petitioner did not have to go to 15 different schools, because none of us thought it was a good idea, not staff, not board, not parents, not anybody really involved. And so once the ball kind of got rolling and us getting through our new thing, I think the time is really down to the amount of time to read the book, because obviously reading the book in its entirety is something that I think we all value. I don't think that's something that is up to, you know, that anybody disputes. So in terms of timeline, we were changing the policy. We did wait on the policy change, kind of like we are right now, and I don't say that critically at all. I think process is important. I think policy is important. But I also think a clarity around it, we were starting to form sort of a clarity around the process. I think it's really important if you discuss the status of the books that we're really clear on language around formal review, because we don't have formal requests on the majority of the books that we are reviewing. And so just a quick reminder for the board and for those that weren't on the board at the time, I may get an email from a parent just expressing their concern or some version of that. I've gotten handouts, all kinds of different things. Doesn't matter to me how they've gotten it. At that point, it's like any other concern a parent would express to us. We're going to go to the schools. We're going to try to find out, is it appropriate? Do we need to make a correction? So then I reach out to the schools. First, I have my staff show where they're located. And then we reach out to the schools because sometimes books go missing. Sometimes all of the others have occurred. Or when they review the feedback, they agree with the feedback and they pull the book. Like any other circumstance, we have staff change, perspectives change, times change, right? I don't think that, I haven't seen the media specialists taking any personal, and I've sent them a million emails, any personal sort of affront. And so they review it. Sometimes they agree with the petitioner right away. Sometimes they make some additional decisions. And so then I send that information back to the petitioner. So here's where it is, this is what they've reported, and then the petitioner will then decide if they want to file a formal request. And again, we've sort of hashed this out over the school year. And so, for example, right now I have 11 formal requests that have been through that process. We've communicated with the petitioner and began scheduling them, right? So we did the first 3 and then paused. And so it does allow for that thoughtful review first, which I think is really important. And so when discussing like the status of a book, just the board's clarity around formal review, I think is really important, as opposed to just any email that I might get, as opposed to the actual petition and formal process being followed. I would ask the board to consider that as you're discussing what you want to see in the policy and what process you want to see unfold. We're also in an interesting time because the state is tackling this very topic as well. So they are going through and developing training and expectations of media specialists. If you recall from the statute change from this past legislative session, that's all due by January 1st. And so there may be some language there as well. So current state is, I think, thoughtful, but I also think continuing to tweak those things that concern the board. We're happy to give a draft of anything you like. Again, I will just need clarification on process, because typically we would continue. Typically, if we receive requests under this current process, we would utilize the current policy. So as the board knows, in different issues that we have faced, we did receive them under this current policy. And so I would need just board direction on that expectation, since the ones that were received were under this current, and typically we keep them under the current policy of which they were received. And again, I don't really have a strong opinion. I just want the board to consider, we'll need clarification on that, as well as, when they come in under which policy, if we're changing it again, which one do you want me to follow? So I just ask for some specificity around that as well, if we're looking to entertain some changes on that. And Mr. Gibbs, anything else related to a midstream policy change that I'm missing?
Nope, I think you covered most of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. In regards to, and thank you for that backdrop and everything else, I had some questions in regard to the process eventually, but it's my turn to say about how I feel about it. What it comes down to for me is that I do appreciate all of the input of all of the staff, but I do believe that if it's going to be our elected board positions that are in jeopardy, if we have books that are inside of our schools that are inappropriate, I believe that it should be our team that actually makes the decision. So if we are going to be, meaning that if we have books that are inside of our elementary schools or high schools that we haven't dealt with that are in there, then we may be in violation of the state statutes. That falls on us, not staff, unfortunately. So I have no problem moving to the 5 board representatives being the voting members. with the intent of keeping the other members on there for input, just like a regular committee. And so I feel that very strongly about that. So that puts us into a situation where you have two people who have moved that direction, two people that say they'd like to keep the same direction. But Ms. Wright, you had mentioned there was kind of like this quasi thing that you were trying to come up with. I wanted to give you the opportunity to try to explain that piece, like those extra board members, maybe there's another way that, or those other employees of the district. Do you want to explain a little bit in there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, if it is going to come back on us, then it should be us that is responsible for who's appointing it. But I do like the idea of the professional experience that we have from some of our media specialists, but I just struggle with the fact that I think there's a conflict there when they are paid by BPS, and I can't get around that. So really, I guess it's going to be the majority of the board on what they decide they want to do for the makeup of this. For our current sitting members right now, what happens there? Because we haven't rewritten this policy right now. Is that correct, Paul? For us to be able to appoint a person.
Right, the policy's not rewritten. The policy doesn't explicitly say whether the new members get to appoint and replace a member on there.
Okay.
The policy just says the board gets one appointee, and the committee starts at the start of the school year. So that's really the limiting language, is they serve for a year for the school year, and they start at the beginning of the school year. So that's the only piece that we're drawing from. If the
Okay.
board wants to interpret that to allow board members to appoint new members, then that's the will of the board
I
at this
think
point.
we have a consensus on that.
We do.
Well,
Ms.
can I
Campbell
ask
said
Ms.
that.
Sullivan this, though? Are they in the middle of reading a book right this moment?
Already the third title, because we had anticipated having that one on the 20th.
Okay,
But I did communicate with the team that we were on a pause, and I do believe the current members understand,
right.
the discussion on makeup. So if we were to interpret, if the board were to interpret in the manner that Mr. Gibbs described, I don't think it would cause much conflict. We would certainly take your appointees, reschedule the meeting, give them an opportunity to read. Fortunately, this third book is probably the shortest book
Oh, good.
out of all the ones, so it would be less of a time delay.
Okay.
Then we return to big fat ones again. So this third book happens to be one of the smallest of the titles, and so they're just at the ready. The other three members, I'm sure, have read them and would not be surprised at any of that. But again, it still falls under, the rest of it isn't about interpretation, I assume. So if the board is choosing to interpret the two new members, that's super easy. I can facilitate that once you select someone, and I can get this third book rescheduled. But all those other questions still remain for the board to decide.
I think there was consensus to allow you guys, under the current definition, to make that selection. Do you guys know, apparently, are you guys in a place where tomorrow maybe you can email your representative to Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
They can send it to Dr. Sullivan's.
Or Dr. Sullivan or whoever? Are you in a good place to sometime this week get that to him?
Oh, absolutely. I believe Tammy already has
Okay.
mine.
So coming back to you, Ms. Wright, we had spoken about the board members selected group being the only voting members, but you had mentioned that there might be some sort of a quasi that you might want to do, or are you saying that, you know what I mean? I wanted to give you the floor there.
Yeah, because I honestly, working through this process, I don't have a solution for this right this moment, and we can obviously come back to it and bring somebody to add to this committee again in the future. I think for right now, until I kind of wrap my brain around who that person would be that has the media experience that we were looking for, I'm okay with it consisting of just our appointed members for right now, to make it simpler.
Okay. So that brings us, Mr. Gibbs or Ms. Sullivan, is that enough direction for you for the next policy to?
I have a comment on that.
Hang on just
We're
a
not
second. So are you, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to comment, Ms. Jenkins, but have you gotten the opportunity that 3 board members have said that they would like to move to that direction, and they can email you their selected representatives?
two separate stories. The selected representative, super easy.
Mhm.
The issue at the change of policy, we're saying three-person consensus on only the board representatives voting.
Mhm.
And then that would require a policy change,
Mhm.
which would mean the board would have to make a clarifying decision on the ones in the current
Yep.
process.
And that's what I think, we can do that in just a second. I just wanted to make sure that the process.
I'm with you so far.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure because we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit on some of the conversations and stuff like that. But we do have board direction that the 5 individuals that would be voting are going to be the individuals that we select. And I think now we can move towards the process, right? And Ms. Jenkins, you can definitely have conversations in a minute about your
no, I'd like to have a
feelings about that.
conversation
Just
now.
hang on just a second.
No, sir, this is a
Mr.
workshop, and we just discussed a topic. Ms. Wright had multiple times to speak on that topic. It is also my right to speak on that topic.
Ms. Jenkins, I am not disagreeing with you that you have time. All I'm saying is that we have to keep moving because it's 4 o'clock.
Okay,
And if you have anything to say on that topic, I would love to hear it when we come to the next piece. But for the time purposes, if we can stay on a process, which is the next piece, you have ultimate opportunity in a second. If we can just let Mr. Gibb or Mr. Trent actually give us what his process is that he's doing, and then I'll give you the opportunity to
I'm
speak.
going to have to disagree with you, Mr. Susan. We are talking about one thing right now. It makes no sense to go backwards to talk about it. It makes no sense at all.
Ms. Jenkins, you can definitely do that, but I'm just saying that we've already given board direction. We each had
That's
an
great,
opportunity
and I
to
have a
speak.
right. I have a right to speak. Again, we're equal board members.
Mr.
Susan.
Trent, go ahead.
For us to move forward, if you don't mind, Mr. Susan, I'm going to give the time to Ms. Jenkins for her to go ahead and
Okay.
clear that.
Thank you very much. So, I'm well aware that you gave board direction, but I have to speak about some of the things that were said. Multiple times there were statements about conflict of interest, and I think there is a conflict of interest, but I don't think it resides within the committee members. It doesn't make any sense to me. It is their interest. It's their job. Who could have more interest than our media specialists in the media center? Suggesting that they might have that book in their library, and then what are the odds that they're going to vote to take it out? Well, I don't know if you're well aware of how books end up in the library in the first place. They don't read all of them. And so I think we can trust their critical judgment and their professionalism to come to a consensus whether or not they agree that still belongs on the shelves, and we've witnessed that already. It was mentioned that we have to worry about the security of our elected positions because it falls on us. Well, some of us don't operate on that. And this wouldn't fall on us as individuals if there was a breach in state statute. It would fall on the school district. We already deal with that. There already have been situations where those books have been removed because it was clear as day. And the point of the committee is to come to a consensus whether or not that material does not abide by that said state statute. And so essentially what we're saying is we don't even want to have the committee because we're not trusting that process that we put in place. Also to say statements that these members of this committee shouldn't have a voting right because they're paid by BPS. Well, guess what? We're paid by BPS too. Should we not have a voting right? It makes zero sense. Absolutely zero sense. And I have to clarify this because the statement was made and it's critical to be addressed. You cannot mess with AP curriculum. They will pull your credentials, and if you pull AP credentials out of this school system, man, the impact you will have for this school system, for the community, for the businesses, for the district ratings, for our students trying to get into certain colleges. And they made it very clear that once you start messing with the materials that they suggest for their curriculum, they aren't afraid to pull out. So we need to be really, really careful about those statements and how we address that.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins.
All right.
Mr. Trent, you have the opportunity to speak about process.
So the process, and to speak on that, if there's an AP book that is going to be discussed, it should be discussed in that manner and dealt with, not just pulling out of all AP books, so we don't have them to be accessed. So that's a deflection. I don't want to go down the road there.
Mr. Trent, it was said,
Yes.
it was said to be prioritized.
Prioritize meaning put them in the front of the list so we can talk about them
Right,
first.
but you cannot
Ms. Jenkins.
remove an AP.
But we could talk about the
You
access
cannot
to that
remove an
book.
AP book.
Ms. Jenkins, please.
Just the access of certain books. It has been that already where we have challenged access to a particular age group, for example, in a 7-12 district. Okay, so I'm confident we'll deal with the AP books there. Are you talking about the process and how we want to get these books?
Speed it up.
Yeah.
No, speed the process.
Speed the process up. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll do my best too. Totally am with you, Dr. Sullivan, on even on an email for you to do your due diligence, take a look at it. If it's something egregious, you get to it. I'm a big proponent, though, of a formal request. I think that anyone can send an email, but to actually ask a parent to put a formal request together will go through some of those frivolous requests to look at, because there's some very good questions in here. So I do believe that continues to need to be the process of getting them in there. Removing. Well, one thing I will fight back or pull back on a little bit, where you said we all agree on the entire book needs to be read. That's where I differ. They're not requesting a review because they didn't like the storyline or the ending of the book, or if it had the story in itself had literary benefit for the student. It's usually specifically a situation, a chapter. We do not need very many specialists to understand as a parent what we don't want to put in front of our children. So yes, we have to, I know there's components of state statute, but they always end that with, err on the side of caution or err on the side of protecting the innocence of our children. I will always go with that. So I really don't care where we're at in a particular book review. It is the content on where the individual parent, taxpayer has a concern in that book. I don't see any reason why we couldn't go through a book an evening of the content of what's questioned, not should we put it on a curriculum and write a report on it in our classroom. So it is exactly the reason why some math books were pulled. It wasn't the entire content of the math book or a particular chapter. It was a specific reason, and we have to get back to that. This is how this all started, was particular reasons of why a book should be in question, not the story. Okay? We need to get these out as soon as we possibly can after a formal review, or after you absolutely say this has something, there's some substance here. Like this one slipped through the cracks.
So, Mr. Trent, what I'm hearing you say is that you would like to make it to where all the requests are formally done, rather than just an email shooting to staff, right? You would also like to set up an entire, instead of reading the entire book, because just so many of the public knows, we reviewed 2 books in 3 months, is what I think the schedule is. Dr. Sullivan, can you verify that?
It's based on the length of the books.
Sure.
And so we calculated a week per 100 pages, just for that. The state statute does say that it has to be considered in its entirety. So, that's certainly something we can bring back at any draft that the board's requesting. But just for clarity, that is based on current state statute, and they actually use that verbiage.
Okay.
So, yeah, our current is based on the length of the book so that the committee has time to read the book.
Okay. And so what you're saying is that you'd like to have it to where just that specific section is looked at, right? And then you had mentioned a third one, but go ahead, you were just going to say something. I'm just trying to clarify.
No, you can clarify it, Nan. If I don't believe the request is they're upset about the storyline of the book. Okay, and if state statute says that, that's great. But we can also, again, we're going to err on the side of caution. If the book's off the shelf and that committee decides they want to read the entire book, that's fine. It's just going to take that long to get it back on the shelf. I don't think it's necessary to do that. That's not why these concerns are being put forth.
Okay. Yeah, I'll come to you because I just want to redefine it, and then I'm going to come to you right
Yeah,
now.
I just want to clarify something that he said, because I don't think that I heard him say that he wanted everybody to do a formal process. I think what I heard him say was that the formal request is what triggers this, that we can continue to have the informal process, but the formal process is what would trigger the committee, or maybe potentially pulling the books off the
And
shelf.
that, everything other than, of course, the decision on poll book is currently in practice and what we've been doing.
Right.
Which I commended Dr. Sullivan on doing that, is if you did get an email that didn't automatically go to the review process, that you did the right thing
That's
by
correct.
looking into it.
Informal.
Do the informal search, but for anything to get to a review process, you would
Okay.
get back to them and say, we did not feel it needed to be pulled. You're more than welcome to fill out a formal review.
And then the third component is that you would like these to be immediately removed because they may be in violation of a state statute or something like that. Okay. So we have the three pieces that he wanted to work on the process. Who would like to speak to the topic? Ms. Campbell?
So say the first one again, because that's what we were just clarifying.
What he was basically wanted to make sure is that if somebody sent in an email and said, hey, I've got this problem, that, yeah, you can look at it and do that. But in order for it to formally come before a book review committee, they need to fill out the form because you felt very strongly about the
That's already,
process.
right, and that's already in there,
read
so I
it in
think,
the policy.
yeah, I think we're good to
Okay.
say we're gonna leave
Yep.
that in there, yeah. As far as,
Yep, nope. And then what you have to do is not to read the entire section.
right, I think we need to stick with the whole thing. Statute does say taken as a whole, right, so we need to take it as a whole, even if, I understand, and I think that's more of a statement to the public who are saying we're book banning and all that stuff than it is necessary. I mean, the committee was very thoughtful and taking things in context, and I'm thankful for my member, because honestly, there are some of those books I wouldn't be able to get through, and I have to Clorox my eyes. Sorry, I'm a prude. Proud one. But I will say that the time frame of doing it, there is the 100, because of all the busy lives and staff, the 100 pages for a week, that's reasonable, but there is a way for us to speed it up, because the policy currently allows for us to have multiple committees, and I know that would put a lot of Ms. Slack, but we can actually have more than one committee going at a time, and so and just this one taking this books and these one take this book, so we could go a little faster that way if we were to get backed up. That's one way already in the policy currently. I would just go back to it as far as the process. I think if someone submits this formal request and the particular incident is especially, the issue is the Florida Statute 847.012, then because there are other requests. Maybe it's a religious issue that someone has or something else, whatever. But, the majority of the requests we've received have been based on sexual content. So if that sexual content that this would trigger, my request, I'm going to go back to what I asked last spring and whatever I said today, is that we do go ahead and put those behind the shelf at the very minimum with parent permission only until they go through the process. And I think that would actually help a lot of what our problems are in the meantime.
Ms. Campbell, if you can just explain the parent permission piece, because I think people might want to know a little bit more about your.
Yeah, so this is what happened to the first book. The committee decided that it was an adult book. It was advertised, it was written for adults, it was advertised for adults, it did end up on some of our shelves. And so the committee decided to leave it in the library in that particular case, but the only people who could access it would be 18-year-olds who are adults. And legally,
They specifically behind the counter.
right, behind the counter. So it's not like a 7th grader or a 9th grader can just walk up and grab it off the shelf, which is the problem with leaving them on the shelves out in the general library. So they put it behind the shelf. Only 18-year-olds or parents who specifically give permission. My child can access this book. And just if you watch the meeting, just for technicality's sake, that was shown to be a much better process for the media specialists actually to have, when they're, because if they're checking out a book, you know, our media specialists they're amazing how well they know not just their collection, but their students. And so, but for them to keep track of who can check out what, it becomes a nightmare if you're leaving it out on the general shelf. And so to have it back where you can't access it unless you ask for it, that's a little bit easier. And plus, then if you've got someone else, let's say a student aide who's checking out the books, or a substitute or something like that, then you don't have to worry about them knowing who can and who can't and which books. So that was the parent permission. That is an option that was made available to the committee. It's something they can continue to use. It's something that we could write into the policy. If we didn't feel comfortable, completely pulling them out, we could leave it. And I'm not advocating for one or the other, but that's something we could go ahead and put in there and say, if the formal process is initiated, then we will go ahead. We're directing the school or schools, if it's a district-wide, to go ahead and put that behind the shelves and only allow it with parent permission until such time that the review committee is done.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So what Ms. Campbell had mentioned is that she said that may be an opportunity for us to look at. Ms. Jenkins, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I don't.
Okay, Ms. Wright?
No, I like what Mrs. Campbell is saying. I think it's a compromise right now to remove them from being accessible to children immediately, and then it gives time for that process. It's a compromise. It's not 100% what I would like. I still stand behind the fact if the book can't be read from right there at the podium, it shouldn't be read by our children, and that's how I feel about that. But parents always have the option to buy those books for their children outside of school. So it's not a book banning. It's just saying it's maybe not appropriate to be in our schools for our children through taxpayer-funded libraries. So
Thank
that's my
you.
thoughts.
We had a situation most recently where there was a book that was on the shelves that had been there since the beginning of the year. It was identified and flagged as inappropriate, and I just kind of want to ask Dr. Sullivan about that process, if we can do that, because I think that speaks to what the concern is for me and for Ms. Campbell and others. We had a book that was called Wicked that was on the shelves. Is that correct?
I am not familiar with what title you're speaking of.
Okay.
Not anything under that with that title.
Okay.
Yeah.
If there's
We
a
did-
book
yeah.
that comes out to be currently in the schools that is inappropriate, right? And it's red flag, it's right, it's all these things. What does the school district do in that case? Because it violates law, right?
So we had a similar situation earlier, and we received a concern, reached out to the principals and media specialists immediately pulled it. So the informal process, triggered that very quick resolution, and that's why there wasn't more, because the informal process, worked. Like I said, everybody wants to do the right thing, and sometimes, so in that case, the one that I'm aware of is I received a concern, shared that concern with the schools that had the title, just like I was kind of hypothesizing earlier. Principals and media specialists immediately pulled the book. And because that one was visually inappropriate, so it didn't require, it was obvious.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan.
So that informal process triggered in that case, which is why there wasn't a formal process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. I really appreciate you explaining that. And so from my perspective, I agree that there are some books out there that may cause some angst. So removing them immediately is okay with me. I agree with that. I like the idea of bringing forward some multiple committees, because then we could move through the process. I think we have a hump where we're trying to get through a set number of books, but once we get through them, we should have a system where it's pretty much done. So instead of having all of the angst over all of these books for, the next 6 months with one committee trying to read 100 pages a day, I really like the idea of multiple committees. It's a great idea, and I want to commend you for coming up with that. The other thing that I would like to do is I just wanted to talk to you guys about, if this is the direction, Mr. Trent, if you're okay with some of that, if you want to respond to some of it.
No, I also agree with, as soon as we get through the majority of these, things should calm down a little bit, and we have to use multiple committees, that would be fine. I'm assuming we would do it in the same makeup as our first committee, so that would be okay.
And just to be clear, can I ask a question? Because I think you two are both saying, if I'm hearing correctly, that you want them pulled out completely. Is that correct? And then the compromise I was saying is, hey, if we're going to come to a compromise, we can put him behind the librarian's area there. And so, and I think that's where Ms. Campbell was as well. So then that puts us at, I want to clarify that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's where I am
That's where she
because
was,
of the
yep.
unintended consequences.
Mhm.
Because I think, because anybody can come in and say, I think this, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe, like I said, we've had people say, I want you to pull the Bible because the Bible has, certain content, I would
Our library.
love to have that conversation with whoever to explain why it's different. So I just, because of unintended consequences, I think that would be a good solution to go ahead and make them be behind the shelf until we get to, with specific permission. So people, if they want their children to have access to those books, then the parents making that choice until such time as the committee. And we may have it. I doubt, I don't know. I'm just going to throw this out there. If we have something that's still on there and then the informal process didn't resolve it for multiple schools, it's probably not a situation where the committee might even say so long. But, we have different committee makeup. It may, I don't know how it's going to go. But, I'm not pushing, just so we're clear, my main thing is that those books are not sitting out on the general shelves. So I think whether it's pulling them all but I think it would just make sense to go ahead and at least put them back and say their parent permission only until the committee can make a decision.
So I think that there's board direction to do exactly what Ms. Campbell said. Since both of you feel that way, Mr. Trent and I feel like we would like to pull them. I think that's a good compromise. Mr. Trent, is that where you think is good?
If that's going to get us to where we need to be, that's fine.
Okay.
I just want to, on record, I would rather have them
Yep, me
off
too.
and out.
Yep.
And then maybe the committee will have some leeway once they see these of ultimately where this book needs to go.
Okay.
So if we have to compromise on it getting them off the floor, that's fine for now.
Okay. Ms. Jenkins, you had passed on speaking. I was going to give you the opportunity to speak before we go on to the next topic, which is I think we're going to speak a little bit to multiple committees, because I think we may want to expand some of our names to Ms. Sullivan in the event that we want to expand that. But I wanted to give Ms. Jenkins an opportunity to speak to that real quick if you wanted to, since you passed.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I don't agree with either of those things, so I'm glad you guys came to your own consensus. When it comes to multiple committees, I think that sounds really easy. However, that would require more board appointees. Dr. Sullivan just said that there weren't volunteers banging down the doors, and you just took away their input and their ability to even participate and vote in the process. So there will be less people willing to volunteer their time for generally no purpose whatsoever, no value to be there and participate other than to maybe get a free young adult novel to read. So I get that that's already in the policy, and I'm glad you brought that up, Ms. Campbell, just to say that it exists already and there is a solution there. But it sounds a little bit easier than it probably will actually be able to be implemented. Because again, I don't know if Dr. Sullivan wants to clarify, but I don't know how many people you had knocking on the door. You made it sound like a little bit. Maybe it's more than I'm thinking.
If all of this is part of the next policy change, I wouldn't want to speculate given the potential change in voting. So I honestly just don't know what that might do. Not suggesting kind of an opinion on it one way or another. I'm just not prepared to say what that impact would have on desire to participate in the process. I think from an administrative lens, I personally saw those requests, and there was plenty of people interested in terms of another content specialist. I have one English one, so that gets a little tricky, but it would just depend probably on the entirety of the policy change and where the board lands after the policy change process, which As you know, even though it seems like everybody's on the same page right now, those drafts tend to get revised quite a bit. So I couldn't speculate. I know that was a long non-answer,
No,
sorry.
that's okay. I mean, it was honest about how not simple this might be. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. In moving forward, we have 10 total books that are sitting inside of the pool referred to for the committee. Is that what I heard you say?
We have 10 for sure.
Okay.
We have 4 to 6, like in the in-between almost stage, and then about another 30 that the petitioner has indicated the possibility of those formals. So one of the things the policy does say is when the petitioner is submitting multiple titles, the petitioner will put them in order of their priority, and so we're going through that order right now. I stack the requests in the order that I receive them. So it'll be sort of one petitioner for a bit, potentially another petitioner, back to that first petitioners, because there are a couple different petitioners.
Okay. So I think if it's okay with everybody, what we may want to do is go back and come up with 3 or 4 possible candidates that we might want to appoint to a review committee. Dr. Sullivan, you're going to reach out to your staff to try to see how many may want to be participatory towards this process. And then when you guys bring back the policy, we might be able to say, okay, we can form a total of maybe 2, 3 committees to review these books to get them moved through so that we can get them
I'm going to
back.
throw one monkey wrench, and I know you hate when I do that to you,
No,
Mr. Susan.
I don't at all, actually.
One monkey wrench, the policy actually specifies the authority to convene another committee lies with the superintendent.
Okay.
So that's just another policy thing. I just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that.
How about we change that?
I was going to say that that's ours to change.
Right.
You can't just change it like right now.
No,
I
but
know
we
that.
can make that, and then I don't think that there's going to be a conflict with the superintendent.
I'm just sharing.
No, I appreciate that.
Just
And
sharing.
that's a great point, Dr. Sullivan, so thank you.
But to that point, we do need, one thing she asked us to do is decide, are we going, because we don't, I'm not comfortable, I think if we want to go ahead and get the committees back going with the new members, we can do that, but I'm not comfortable with us operating under the, what we have, when we don't have it, it's not there in writing until we have it in writing. So because, as Dr. Sullivan just said, we don't know what it's going to look like exactly. And the other thing is, we are having this conversation without having the public input. It's very important for us to get the public input, which we have in the policy revision process. And so if we go ahead and say, Dr. Sullivan, we want you to operate from now moving forward under what we've kind of pieced together today, that is not good governance. And so I think we either need to decide, are we asking her to put a hold on the whole review process until we revise the policy, or are we telling her, go ahead and start the process back up with the 2 new committee members, representatives, and then once we change the policy, then we'll change it then. So I'm not.
Absolutely. I think we have clear board direction to number of voting members. We have clear board direction that we want to move to a possible multiples. We have clear board direction that we're going to pull the book immediately and then have the parent go. That I feel is there. And good point, Ms. Campbell. What we need to do is decide now what we currently have in place, if we want to let that go until the board members or this policy can come up. And I was going to ask Mr. Gibbs to give us kind of a schedule of that. And then, or are we going to stop it until the new policies come up? So Mr. Gibbs, can you kind of give us a formal process, because we absolutely do need to hear from the public. But we've done these in the past. So walk me through what you think would be a respectful amount of time.
You've got to do it in the public because it's rulemaking. So I usually say 60 to 90 days is what you should expect for rulemaking. It's going to depend on how much back and forth once you guys start to get into the red line.
Yep.
Normally, we advertise that out. You have to have 14 days before the first public hearing, which comes at a workshop. You have to have 28 days notice before the final approval, which is the second public hearing. And then the board process includes that one meeting before the first public hearing, which is usually at a workshop to go over red lines. So I don't
So-
know. And this one, what I'm hearing kind of is you guys may want an additional workshop before we advertise so that you guys can provide feedback and direction on the proposal that Dr. Sullivan and I can come up with for your consideration, then take back any comments and then get it on a track.
I think,
Right now, I can't give you a timeline. We don't have dates in 2023 yet. So I can't even advertise meetings for any policies. I've got all policy rulemaking on hold.
all right, Mr. Gibbs, let me ask you this. So the 14 days before so what the direction that I thought, and we can talk about that, is that we asked Dr. Sullivan to bring back kind of quasi what we're doing. We, at that point, can either accept that and move on as the first step, or we can workshop it a little bit and then wait, right? So the first time that we would be able to do that, the 14 days, is that inhibited? We would have to notice that. We would actually have to wait for staff to actually bring it back to us. But then
Don't need to worry about us.
right, the 14 days before is a recording just based on the cycle of Florida today, or is that state statute?
No,
based
that's
on it?
state statute.
Okay.
In rulemaking process, you have to notice the public with no less than 14 days prior to the first public hearing.
Right.
In rulemaking, that's usually held at the workshop. Right? Then you have to provide 28 days, no less than 28 days, prior to the second and final public hearing where the rule is going to be adopted.
And the 28 days is after the 14?
No,
or
we
can you
usually
notice
do it
both
at the
of them?
same time. We usually notice it. So we'll put that ad out in time for 14 days to hit, and it'll be far enough out that the 28 days is met.
And so it's 14 and then 14, correct? To a total, so your first is 14.
It usually is over 28 days because of the way the board meetings fall.
So
So,
potentially, we
just
could
hang on,
have
hang on, Ms. Campbell. So if we do it now, 14 days later, we would have the first meeting, we would workshop it and everything else. And
It
if we
wouldn't,
agreed to it,
it's not going to be 14 days.
I understand, but I'm just saying hypothetically, 14 days later, we would also have the next second one, and then what is the third piece after that? What is?
The third piece is board built. You have that one, because if you're in rulemaking, so if you make a change in rulemaking, so at that workshop, and the board says, hey, we want to go this direction, we got to start over.
Yep.
So we built in that extra workshop where the board gets to discuss it and say, we want this tweak. I go change the rule, bring it back at the first public hearing, and we're on track. So for instance, we have policies on tonight. If the board makes a change tonight at the final public hearing, those policies come off, we restart the cycle. I'm advertising on new dates for the 14 days and the 28 days.
And sometimes if we met for the workshop, if we all agreed to it, it could go to the board meeting that evening? Is that?
No.
And we have to wait another 14 days?
If you make changes, you have to wait.
Okay. But if we didn't make any changes, it could go that evening
For-
to the
For
first?
the first public hearing, it cannot go on the board meeting that night.
Okay, so you have 14 days and 14 days is it from the?
You
from the
have,
start.
from the date of the ad running, you have to have 14 days before the public hearing, the first public hearing, and 28 days to the second
Perfect.
public hearing.
Okay, so with that,
just to make it, because that's a lot of, just to put feet to it, so we could potentially have a work session on our proposed meeting date in January, which I think is the 24th, the first meeting in February, have a workshop, which would also be the first public hearing, assuming we're not making further changes,
Right,
and then have it approved at the second meeting in February.
yes.
correct.
Okay.
So by the end of February, we're done.
Potentially, yeah.
So with that, does that sound like a good process for you guys?
It does, and thanks for all that clarification. And so we're not going to absolutely halt everything, that's what I was hoping not, because I would hope to continue the process of if an email concern comes in, that you still do that process.
That's in current policy.
Yes, that's there, so that's going to stay, and then encourage the formal complaint, but do that part, but just the actual committee work, that's what's going to be on hold until we come up with our details on the policy. I just wanted to clarify that. Perfect.
I'm good?
I need one more bit of clarification. I'm almost there. So it was that final discussion on you are requesting that we halt the process, even though the previous request came in under the other policy. The current policy. That's the only thing I need clarification on
She's asking when you had spoken before about that, yep.
from the board, you
Oh,
know. as a
yeah.
whole.
No,
Yeah.
I want to get
Yeah.
clarification from him so that we can do it, you
Yeah.
had mentioned.
Right, the board, or the review committees halted. We're not going to just change it because we're going to change policy. So we didn't want her to manipulate anything on the current policy other than continue with, receiving the requests to look in the material and then urge the formal request to go to the review. And then that's where it will halt until we.
So, Mr.
Figure it
Trent,
out.
you're saying that the process continues so that people can continue to identify books?
Yes.
But you would like the current committee to stall until February?
Yeah.
Until the process can change and stuff like that? That's what he wants.
Dr. Sullivan's asking for a different clarification.
Yeah, you're asking about the 11 books right now that are currently
Right.
in question under the policy as it stands, correct?
It's just our sort of normal question of, those requests were submitted formally through the current policy.
Right.
And so
It runs under that policy.
that's the question
Okay.
on, obviously, the board can decide what it decides. I just want to be clear, because a petitioner submitted properly a formal request under the current process. And I don't mind, whatever the board decides on this, I just want to make sure I need that clarification. Are we asking that to stop? Or I can certainly reach out to the petitioners. I don't have a problem with that. I could reach out to the petitioners and ask if they are okay, if you will, with that pause, because typically when we have requests with a due process, it's related to the policy at the time of the request.
So, to clarify on this, if we're talking all the way till February, what are we doing with the books that are in that review process? Does that?
That's the question.
That's exactly right.
The ones that are going on right now, what are we going to do?
Right.
It's normally, I'll just give you an example. When we had people requesting on a different policy, we changed the one about changing a school name. We had to finish that process with the policy as it stood,
Right.
which took 18 months and the 3 meetings and whatever. We had to, because that was the request came under that.
Right.
Any requests that come once we change that policy, then they follow the new policy. So that's what she's asking us. That's our normal. So it really, to me, it would be a matter of going back to the requester and saying, are you okay with holding off on your requests until we have a new policy in place? Because if they submitted it under the old policy, and just technically, if they say, no, I submitted it under the old policy, I want to follow through, then we would need to honor that request.
Also,
That's
there's currently one in process right now. So I think she's asking for clarification for that purpose too, because we halted mid-process.
Yeah.
So,
I think that is the same petition. I don't have a problem reaching out to any of the petitioners at all. I certainly don't mind, if the petitioner says, I want it under this current policy, I'm assuming absent, of course, the changing of the 2 representatives, that I will notify the board and let them know, and we will do that in good faith. I'm assuming, feel free to stop me if I'm assuming wrong, but if the petitioner is comfortable with us waiting on this new policy, we'll certainly do that as well.
Right.
So I don't think that the actual process that we put together, from them making the formal request to them going through and what standards and all that stuff, it's just the committee makeup. So I don't know if they're saying that, hey, the new change is based on the voting members of the committee, and if they're concerned about the book and they're making the request, it's all automatically coming off. So I would imagine that they would be okay with that.
Not until policy changes.
Right.
All right.
So the books are going to stay in the libraries until February. That's what we're at now. Correct?
But what she's mentioning is that if they've all gone under and somebody says, no, I want it to go through the current policy, that we would literally be selecting and going through with the older policy as we're trying to go with the new policy, creating 2 committees, one that has voters that we, from the other one, and voters that we have currently. So my suggestion would be that when it comes to February, we just move to the new policy, but that's up to the board.
Yeah, anyway, I think, yeah.
You don't have
The discussion with the
Petitioner, I'll
the
start there.
petitioner would be it. I have a suspicion that they're going to be fine with the halt until the new makeup of the.
I try not to guess.
Yeah.
So I will absolutely reach out, let them know.
Let them know, or give them that
And if
option.
they feel otherwise, I'll certainly let the board know.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And I would remind the board that during any kind of statutory changes, anything, it's the date that it changes that it makes the difference. So this is not that in our state laws that we allow laws to continue to go on because some applicants had been in, it changes immediately depending on the statute. So if it's effective immediately, it changes immediately. So we have that governing power to do. It's just, it's a respectful towards the people that have applied. So
Well,
if you can ask them all.
Absolutely.
And then maybe bring that back and then we'll make that decision.
Yeah,
when
I'll
we get
follow
back.
up.
But the rule wouldn't be effective until February.
Right.
Right.
Right, that's all.
Okay.
All right. Are we all okay? Or do we
Yeah.
want to, do we speak a little bit to it? Kind of jumped around a little bit
I
there.
think we're good, but Mr. Susan, I'm just taking a look at the clock, and we've got people coming in for,
Yep.
ready to get ready for the board meeting. So I would suggest that we toss this last
Yep.
suggestion to the board meeting or a later time. Oh, we actually have 2 left.
We have 2, yeah.
Can we
So-
do that so we can take a restroom
Absolutely.
and dinner break?
That's exactly where I was going to go, Ms. Campbell. So we have the implementation and payout schedule of salary agreement and the policy 0169.1 that we would like to move to this evening. If you guys are okay with that, it sounds good to me. I like that. We're all in agreement?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be back at 5:30.